G'day mate, 40 here. Just finished an absolutely exhausting 2-hour appearance on Stephen J. James's channel. And this is when I'm at my best, right? Early morning. So I was inclined to stream last night after the Sabbath. I had all these topics lined up that I might get to this morning. I was ready, but I'm simply not as sharp at 6 p.m. in the evening as I am compared to, say, 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. But I was exhausted, just absolutely wrung out there from that interview with Stephen J. James. And in pursuit of clarity, realizing that 95% of my exhaustion had nothing to do with the truth element of what I had to say. 95% of my exhaustion was trying to frame things in response that the widest possible audience would be able to understand what I was saying. And that's a noble way of framing, trying to frame things in a way that would align with my own self-interest. And it's an incredibly painful realization that there is no upside in my self-interest from appearing on Stephen J. James's channel. And I love Stephen J. James. He's a friend. Love the guy. And yet it's a brutal possibility that is completely against my self-interest to appear on this reasonable and responsible YouTube channel. But just on the face of it, I just don't see how even me at my best and framing things in the most socially acceptable way, like, all there are pitfalls and downsides. And that's not saying I'll never appear on the channel again. Just the brutal truth is that conversation can only hurt me. And then I'm thinking I should have had realization with those sort of conversations for the past 6 years, right? This is just coming to me just off the top of my head right now. Perhaps that's not true. But it sure seems to me that 99% of people who engage in these kind of highly uncomfortable, socially unacceptable conversations do it against their own best interests. So I am all for optimizing for truth. But for 99% of people, 99% of the time, it's more important to optimize your public appearances interests for your self-interest rather than for truth. Now, I wouldn't spend much time listening to people who are primarily, I don't think I would, who primarily use the frame of their self-interest to shape what they have to say on public issues. But self-interest should be a vitally important principle, right? I often hear that principles are more important than personalities, but your self-interest should be a vitally important principle for you. And your group's interests should be a vitally important principle to you, and your national interest should be a vitally important principle to you. So I'm absolutely wrung out. Yet I want to perhaps respond to more of the chat. And damn, I thought I'd saved it, but it's not really saving. So maybe it will display here on my iPad. Okay, let's see if we can run through some of the chat. Stephen J. James, is this a political commentator? Yes, he does comment on politics. His volume is a bit low. Yes, that's on my end for talking about what was feeding through. That was a simulcast, and what I was feeding through on my channels, that is my fault. Luke was muted now thrice for brief moments. Yes, that is a downside to having some filters on keeping out background noise, that occasionally it's going to mute you. So you have to weigh up the advantages of reducing and eliminating background noise with the occasional muting when you have some words that might change someone's life. Alt-right seems a bit dated now. Interesting movement back in 2016, 2017. Yes, it was essentially done as a political movement within a week after Charlottesville. All right, after Charlottesville, no one with anything to lose could identify with the alt-right. In fact, it was done as a viable political movement once Donald Trump was elected in 2016 and Richard Spencer came out and deliberately associated the alt-right with Nazism. That meant that anyone with anything to lose could no longer associate with the movement. Claire Core announced in the chat, I am of pretty high status. I am of both high status and sincerity and impartiality. All this required for the position of Messiah substitute. So I suspect there is some delusion there. Claire says, let's face it, boys, I am the only one with a solution. I think that is delusional. It is interesting how lefty and Islamic attacks are considered normal and acceptable, and they don't have to publicly renounce them. Well, that is the privilege of when the left dominates most of our institutions, including the news media. So with victory come spoils. On what matter am I deluded? Is secular Quranism not a solution? So I don't know that much about Claire Core, the individual, but I suspect that she has an inflated view of her own social status and an inflated view on the utility of secular Quranism. And we have a quote from Timothy, for men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemous, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy. That seems pretty accurate. Has Duvid ever passed up an opportunity to ingratiate himself to a rabid Judeo-phobe? I don't think Duvid experiences that way, right? I think he experiences what he does as the showing of empathy to a socially ostracized group, and it's a formidable intellectual, psychological, social, cultural feat that he is doing. It's like balancing on a wire strung between the two towers of the World Trade Center. And there's a comment in the chat that there are growing levels of Jewish support for immigration restriction because of the harms done to Jewish safety and success from growing Arab immigration. That's probably true. Couldn't multiculturalism be seen as much of a risk for Jews in Western lands? It all depends on the manifestation of multiculturalism. So to the extent it becomes anti-meritocratic and becomes an instrument that increases criminal violence and social dysfunction and reduces social cohesion, social trust, then Jews, along with non-Jews, will be increasingly incentivized to side against it. Are whites considerably more favorably disposed towards Jews than non-whites? Probably depends in which locations. By and large, in the United States, yes. Meritocratic explains Seth Rogen. I think that I'm not a major maven or student of Seth Rogen, but I expect his success is largely meritocratic, but his audience is not high IQ people like Laponius, right? He is successful with people with 100 IQs. This is becoming the interrogation of Luke Ford. How successful could or would Hollywood have ever been if not for predominantly non-Jewish demand for its product? Not successful. There are bottlenecks in the system, correct? There are key positions within the system that have overwhelming influence, and these positions are held by small hats. I would say there are bottlenecks and there are key positions, and they do have overwhelming influence. I would say that most of the people in these key positions are not Jewish, but a disproportionate number of them come from high IQ groups such as Episcopalians, Jews, groups with high verbal IQs. Mayorkas, Department of Homeland Security, is high IQ. He is doing a great job and totally not appointed to his position. He is doing a great job from the perspective of what was the dominant position of the Democratic Party in the Joe Biden administration. So from the perspective of the average American, he was doing a terrible job. So Donald Trump and the Republicans have managed to make considerable gains among the center of the political spectrum, and the center of the American political spectrum has increasingly shifted in an anti-illegal immigration and possibly even immigration direction. Whites got everything through racism, Jews got everything through sheer merit, is a contention of the chat, obvious sarcasm. So power and merit will usually account for success. The Jewish openness that Mr. Ford speaks of generally has inverse correlation to religiosity level. Openness and clarity usually has an inverse correlation to identity. So the stronger your in-group identity, the less likely you are to have clarity on your in-group. Right? The more committed you are to your in-group, the less likely you are to see it clearly, the more likely you are to have blind spots. The more committed you are to your spouse, right, the more likely you are to have blind spots with regard to your spouse. The more committed you are to your profession, the more likely you are to have blind spots with regard to your profession. The more committed you are to your nation, the more likely you are to have blind spots with regard to your nation. The more committed you are to your religion, the more likely you are to have blind spots with regard to your religion. The more committed you are to a sports bar, the more likely you are to see blind spots with your sports bar. I invited a friend to a favorite sports bar of mine, and he shows up. Number one, there's no TV there displaying his favorite team's game, which I'd never known to happen before. Number two, the audio broke down for the first time that I've ever experienced. And so my favorite sports bar at the time was an absolute disaster. And my friend did not walk away with a positive perspective on my sports bar. I was blind with regard to a favorite sports bar of mine. I have little desire to critique many of the people closest to me. I don't need clarity with regard to them as much as I need excellent relations. When European society is being completely destroyed by immigration, where will Jews migrate to? I expect that all groups will generally tend to act in their own self-interest. How representative was Black Lives Matter of African Americans? I would say it was usually enjoyed minority support among blacks, and the more riots and the more criminal violence associated with Black Lives Matter, the lower the support from blacks and from non-blacks. Yeah, a large number of the most damaging Antifa and Black Lives protesters were white. Luke's incessant appeal to statistics is not a compelling argument. It's akin to saying not all Muslims. No, I never argued not all Muslims, not all blacks, not all Jews. I argued that there is no essential expression of a group or essential character to a group. They will display differently in different circumstances. For example, prior to approximately 800 years ago, Jews were not known. We don't have sources noting that Jews were of higher intelligence than non-Jews. But then we have an explosion of sources noting disproportionately high Jewish IQ approximately 800, 900 years ago. So Ashkenazi Jews within a few generations developed into a group with a high average IQ. By contrast, Sephardic Jews and Mizrahi Jews, so Jews of Spanish origins and Jews of Middle Eastern origins, have average IQs below that of the average white European. So the average white European has an average IQ around 100. Sephardic Jews have an average IQ around 97. Mizrahi Jews around 92. Episcopalians and Ashkenazi Jews have average IQs around 110. So, yeah, different groups commit different rates of crime, and they enjoy different rates of success. And so, if you have a group that is high in spontaneity and creativity, they are also likely to be high in accidents, to be high in crime, to be high in certain forms of mental illness, and to be high in STDs. And groups that are very conservative in the way they drive, they are likely to be conservative in how they have sex and with whom they have sex and their general life strategy. So there's a cliche that Asian Americans drive very cautiously. They also tend to have quite low STD rates. They get into accidents at a lower rate. They are victims of violent crime at lower rates than average. They have higher hourly earnings. They have more educational attainment. They have more family stability. So these truths go together. Weren't most communists complete and total losers and failures that ultimately succeeded? I don't know if the important early communists were complete and total losers. They seem to be able to maintain a higher level of cohesion and effectiveness than people on the alt-right. Plenty of Jews are non- and anti-Zionist. About a third of American Jews strongly identify with Israel. About a third of American Jews mildly identify with Israel. So approximately 2/3 of American Jews you could classify as Zionist, even though half of that number would be quite mild Zionism. And now for the regularly scheduled Luke Ford show. Yeah, I guess. Let me play a video and catch my breath. I'm sure you are a regular viewer of Washington Week with The Atlantic, moderated by our friend Jeffrey Goldberg.
Because there's another friend of Donald Trump who has been active, according to your own reporting, Tucker Carlson.
And I'm even going to play this at 1.0 because I just want to rest.
Another private advisor. You had a pretty big scoop about his ability to quash nominations. Could you give us a little bit of what you discovered this week?
So Tucker Carlson, who, for folks at home who have forgotten, the former Fox News host and right-wing commentator, is a regular at Mar-a-Lago, speaks to the president-elect pretty regularly, and is part of that sphere of influence that we're talking about here with Elon Musk and others, where he has managed to be very influential with the president-elect. And in this case, what I was talking about is the case of former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, former CIA director as well, who was a shoo-in up until almost Election Day to be.
So I used to work in radio, and I would notice the news anchors, right, at the end of their shift, and they might only be on the air for 5 minutes an hour, or possibly 10 minutes an hour, but every word had to count, and they're invariably just absolutely wrung out. And Dennis Prager says after he finishes his radio show, he's just absolutely wrung out, just can't deal with anything or anyone. So I noticed men in particular, we like to go into the cave when we're exhausted. So I think Dennis Prager says he likes to play Spider Solitaire. I've never played any of these games. But I do identify with feeling absolutely wrung out and then not wanting to interact until I rebound. And one observation that Dennis Prager relayed in a lecture on what he learned from being on the radio for 25 years is that the most common and most important feedback he got for the first years that he was doing radio was more energy, more energy, more energy, right? To have any effectiveness and to live up to the responsibilities of being a live streamer or a radio host, you have to put in at least 5 times, but probably 10 times the amount of energy that you would an in-person conversation.
Secretary of Defense, according to a number of people who are close to Trump. But Tucker Carlson, who has long hated him, believes he is, quote, evil, says he's a warmonger, a neocon even, and just a traditional Republican, has made the case to Trump that bringing him back into the fray would be a terrible mistake. He also is convinced that Mike Pompeo tried to assassinate Julian Assange, among other accusations. And so Trump and
unfounded accusation.
Unfounded accusations. And so, you know, Don Jr., Trump's eldest son, also kind of pushed the idea that some of these neocons who turned against Trump in the previous administration, you know, a lot of the national security folks who came out later and said he was unfit to be president, they linked Pompeo to that, and Trump listened. Mike Pompeo's out.
Ashley, I want to talk about another Republican who's in disfavor with the MAGA forces. This week, House Republicans issued a report calling for Liz Cheney to be investigated by the FBI, whose future leader could be Kash Patel, a very strong loyalist of Donald Trump, for her role in the investigation of January 6th. So is this...
I did a shoddy job with my timestamp here. I'll admit it.
Is this rhetorical excess, or is there something more here?
Well, again, this to me is one of the open questions, because Trump says and does and threatens.
Who has such a big footprint as Donald Trump is waiting in the wings. I do think that there's a lot of sort of unfinished reporting done on this, which I think is going to come out around what this White House really did look like. And is that a failing of the media over the last few years? Maybe. But I also think, you know, there was a very serious effort to protect him and to shelter him and to keep him away from cameras and to keep him away from situations where this would be exposed. And look, is it a scandal? I don't know if I'd use that word, but I also think it is a massive source of you know, information that we're still trying to understand.
Right. Mark, let me stay with you. I wanted to ask, since we're coming to the end of the year, I wanted to ask.
Wow, that was a really mild coverage of the lack of coverage of Joe Biden's senility. I don't know why the picture just died on me there in my Chrome browser. Okay, I'm going to have to surf on something else for a minute. All right, let's play some excerpts from Commentary Magazine's podcast, Have Biden's Infirmities Destroyed Liberalism?
We should add that the Wall Street Journal piece, which everyone should read, has prompted an interesting response from a lot of our legacy media folks and mainstream media folks, some of whom are sort of gently hinting and even outright apologizing, like Chris Cillizza, saying, you know what, I didn't do my job. It's terrible. And if you hear the sarcasm in my voice, it is on purpose, because the cynical interpretation of why now all these stories are coming out and why I think we'll hear more Cillizza-like mea culpas isn't because they're acknowledging the error of their ways during the past 4 years. They want to get that off the stage so that they can start arguing that Donald Trump is too old to be president and that his faculties are deteriorating and that, oh my God, what a constitutional crisis this poses. And I don't think that cynicism is misplaced, because I don't trust a single one of these reporters who watched him. And if you read this report, the most astonishing tidbits include how they had to.
So, referring to a Wall Street Journal exhaustive report that the audio version played for 26 minutes on how Joe Biden's infirmities limited his presidency.
As they say, bodily manage the president, basically get him physically from point A to point B. This, of course, also explains my obsession of the last 4 years, which is why he spent so much time in Delaware. There, they could manage him in a very, particular way, away from prying eyes, away from a press that would report much. And we didn't have to hear who came and went. And so he did whatever he did, and no one was the wiser. But the other little part of that story that caught my eye was a sort of defense of this that I think should be absolutely blown to smithereens. And that was this sort of, I think it was someone off the record, maybe they were even on the record, saying, well, we had a whole system to manage making these decisions. And we would, compile these briefs. They would do all of the job of the executive, and then they would choose which important yay or nay, thumbs up or thumbs down decision, like an emperor watching his gladiators. They would go into Joe Biden, present it, and he would say yes or no. No explanation, no anything like that.
And also, like an emperor, they wouldn't bring him bad news.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Very important to note that.
They wouldn't upset the emperor.
Yeah, we heard that about Trump. Remember?
Yeah.
In the Trump term, it's like people would come and bring him positive stories, and they would only want to bring him positive polls. Except the thing about Trump was that his omnivorousness about the coverage of himself meant that there was no way that he was going to miss anything. Positive or negative.
Even if it were true that he were sitting around watching Fox during those 4 years, he was seeing people on Fox push back against criticisms of him. He's always aware of what the discourse is talking about, but also nobody for an extended period of time saw the president alive. Like, can we talk about that for a second? The rare one-on-ones that were granted, the article said they were moved to Zoom. If the Secretary of Defense had to have a face-to-face with the president, it was a screen-to-screen, which means, first of all, it obviously is not one-on-one. There's probably 7 people in the room with Biden while he's on Zoom with you, people in his ear and whatever. And one person said that they were talking to Biden on I don't remember if it was a reporter or if it was a fundraiser thing, but that Biden looked up and said, "I got to go to church." So nobody has seen the president alive besides for like 3 people, and one of whom is his wife. I'm not saying the president isn't alive. Obviously he is, but I'm saying nobody not being allowed. I think it's amazing that in 2024 you actually can pull something like that off without the public knowing that one is seeing. Well, eventually,
but you can't. And we knew. The whole point is we knew because we were talking about it really from January 2023 onward. And the thing that is
he was not there. I'm saying I didn't think you could have a situation where nobody could see the president in person.
Right. Okay, but that's by the way, that's an extreme version of the entirety of the detail, which is that he had 19 cabinet meetings in the course of a 4-year presidency. Now, cabinet meetings are often photo ops. They're not like real decision-making moments or anything. Trump had some pretty comic cabinet meetings where he would make people go around and praise him at the table so that everybody should know that his cabinet was servile, stuff like that. But the point is that the entirety of it, no cabinet meetings, he's not meeting with his defense secretary while the United States is materially involved in the first war on the European continent in 4 generations. He is unable to reach him. He can only see him on Zoom. Now, I would love to be a fly on the wall in a conversation between a non-compos mentis person like Biden and an idiot like Lloyd Austin.
When Austin, no one could reach Austin. So
so maybe they were doing Zoom from between Austin and Biden, and no one even knows.
Well, this is it's kind of the blind leading the blind here, where you have a president no one can see, and then a defense secretary who goes missing, and you're wondering why American deterrence is failing. Just one comment about the Wall Street Journal story. Christine's absolutely right. Why should we trust any of these people or give them any credit when, having gone through the Biden years, having gone through the switcheroo, having gone through Pelosi saying Biden deserves to be on Mount Rushmore, Kamala Harris's joy explosion culminating in just this decisive victory by Trump, now we get all this reporting. We learn pretty definitively that the COVID-19 virus did begin in the lab in Wuhan. And no one's questioning that now. The report came out 2 weeks ago. It was reported by the mainstream media. No one said boo about it. Then we get the New York Times saying, oh, by the way, there's been more immigration in the last 4 years than at any point in recorded history of the United States of America. And the foreign-born population of the United States is now higher than it was at its peak during the Gilded Age. And we'll report that weeks after the election. And now we get this follow-up from the Wall Street Journal, which to its credit was the only major newspaper earlier this year to call attention to what was happening very subtly right before it became impossible to ignore during Biden's trip to Europe and then, of course, during the debate in June. But so I give the Journal credit for that. But now we have this even more detailed report coming out after the election.
Well, look, we had the special prosecutor in the Joe Biden purloined documents case issue a report to the Attorney General in which he said he did it, but I can't pursue a prosecution of him because no jury will convict him because he's senile. Now, what happened to Robert Hur on the day that that report was released? I will tell you what happened. Kamala Harris came out and said, this report is a disgrace. How dare he? Joe Biden is, Bobby Fischer combined with Gary Kasparov. He's got chess moves in 5 dimensions you've never heard of.
And let's bring Colin Liddell onto the show again. Colin, how are you, sir?
Yeah, hi, Luke. How's my audio?
Excellent. Very good.
Okay, good.
So
yeah, I'm fine. How are you?
Good.
You
good.
Bit exhausted after going 10 rounds with SJJ?
I am, and it had very little to do with the truth of the arguments I was trying to make. It was virtually the exhaustion all came from trying to frame things in a way that would be most socially acceptable. So do you get exhausted participating in podcasts and live streams?
Well, not usually, because I don't tend to stay on too long. So kind of like, pace myself. I don't really go on podcasts if I don't really feel in the mood. So as long as you don't go on too long, as long as you stay within your limits, it's not too exhausting.
How about with regard to writing and as well as the spoken word? How much of your cognitive labor is expended in trying to make your argument as socially acceptable as possible, or to minimize its potential negative effect on your personal interest?
Oh, it would really be quite a small percentage, definitely in the single figures, the low single figures.
Right. So I'm exhausted because it's important to me to maintain certain social connections, such as with my Orthodox Jewish community. And I suspect that you're not a big joiner. Is that a fair analysis, Colin?
Not really. I mean, the impression people give off online can be very different from the kind of person they are in real life. So, I wouldn't really agree with that. I mean, when I'm writing, it's mainly an effort to write very quickly before I kind of forget the whole idea. So the whole idea will kind of appear to me in, like some people start writing and they don't really know where they're going. But when I'm writing, I almost always know where I'm going, and it's a question of getting there pretty quickly, laying all the ideas in the correct order so that they are more comprehensible and include, references to the supporting information. And there's a kind of instant structure, and the thing is to get it all down very quickly. So I tend to write pretty fast, and that takes up the energy. And then later you can spend a little bit of time thinking, how can I rephrase this so it doesn't sound too sort of jaggy or too kind of edgy, so it might cause some unnecessary upset. So how can I say the same thing as effectively without causing undue kind of noise?
So, would you feel comfortable sharing anything about a group identity that has at some point been important to you and how you balanced your need for individual expression with belonging to a group? Because these two things tend to be in tension with each other.
Yeah, well, groups are kind of problematic, I always think, because I was a member of the original alt-right, and then I was very aware of the kind of social dynamics that quickly developed and how you were kind of like maybe not even consciously or explicitly, you were kind of expected to move in certain ways and to agree with certain shibboleths and so on. And that started to get a little bit irritating because it was supposed to be an intellectual project, and so I felt there was a bit of a contradiction with intellectual projects that then transmute into kind of social get-togethers, and so that's the problem with the alt-right, and also with a lot of dissident right, and with a lot of intellectual movements throughout history. Really, to be honest, the kind of social dynamic kicks in, and people start to position themselves in that way, and it's so basically it becomes a kind of repeat of ancient ape-like behavior, and at that point you're no longer moving forward, I feel. So I think it's best to separate your social life from your intellectual life.
So for most of my life, I was desperate for other people to tell me who I am. And so I would try to provoke them for a maximum of human attention. Have in your adult life, have you been primarily self-validated, not reliant on other people to tell you about the worth of something that you're doing?
Well, this idea of like having other people tell you who you are, or like asking and answering the question of who am I, what am I really all about, this kind of identity thing, to me it just sounds a little bit artificial and weird. I mean, like, identity is one of these words that's used a great deal. It's booted about all the time. Identity is supposed to be so important, and I'm not really sure that it is. I think when you're born, you're born with an ego. You're born with an awareness. It either develops or it doesn't develop, but it's sort of you get that for free, and you can then sort of like chain it to certain things. You can start to identify as this aspect or that aspect of what you are, and sometimes of what you are not. I mean, because one of the things you notice about the alt-right is it is very, very LARPy, and you have a lot of people who aren't even white identifying as white supremacists. And, I mean, people seem to have some sort of weird artificial hunger for identity these days. And, I'm sure there's a very, very complex and subtle explanation out there for why that is. But I don't really think it. I feel like things like that tend to be a bit extraneous. I think reality is a lot simpler and more to the point than most people think. And once you simplify things, they become much more efficient, and they ring much more true.
Have you experienced the pull of audience capture?
There is a pool, yeah. I mean, like when you write something, or when you're making videos or whatever, or if you're part of some movement and there is some kind of public reaction to that, then it will have certain characteristics, and so you'll be aware that if I go in this direction, that will play well with this audience, and if I go in another direction, that will play badly with that audience. And then you're in a kind of very Faustian position. You've got to really think, am I just going to go along with these morons and give them what they want? And I don't know. It just feels very, very sordid. So I don't really think that's an option for me anyway.
So you have not been captured by an audience to the best of your knowledge?
No, I don't think. I mean, I could rack my brains, but I really don't think that's happened in my case.
What
I've
about
sort of
flattery? Sorry, go ahead.
no. I'm just trying to rack my brains actually, but flattery. Well, people do like praise, but praise can be very manipulative, and so when people are praising you, it's not really something that it's not really something that I like. I feel it's a bit creepy, even when it's completely justified, as it always is in my case.
Have you experienced something, whether cocaine, rock music, pornography, praise, excitement, attention? Have you experienced anything that makes you feel whole and at ease with the world, and just you feel like, now I've made it?
No, nothing like that. I mean, that presupposes that there's a sense of incompleteness, and that you're off balance or something, and that you need something to complete you. And I've never really had that feeling. I think some people are a little bit how can I say, depressive, and they feel something's missing. There's an unhappiness. There's a hole that can't be filled. And some people are not like that. Some people are just kind of naturally content, and they would probably be naturally content whatever situation they were in. And vice versa for the previous group I mentioned. Whatever happens to them, it's never quite enough. Even if they're successful and they achieve their goals, they still feel something's missing. And so those people will sometimes look for that kind of missing piece, and occasionally they'll maybe think they found it. But I think it's just a case of pre-existing psychological types of people. And I've never really had that. I've always been fairly kind of emotionally balanced, whatever's going on. And my engagement with intellectual movements has never been distorted or influenced by that to any degree.
Have you ever had a self-destructive addiction destroying your life?
Well, I'm still here, so obviously not. But
so there was never a time when you were consistently drinking way too much, so that your health and life were at risk?
No, not to the degree of risking one's life. But there are things that you can do to excess, which you, on reflection, you think this is not particularly good for me. I should maybe dial back on this. And so, of course, I think everybody has something like that. So, yeah.
So, what percentage of the people who talk about the topics that Stephen J. James talks about on his YouTube channel, what percentage of them would you estimate are engaging in self-destructive behavior? So my estimate is no fewer than 90%, anywhere up to 99%.
Well, it's a hard calculation to make. I mean, a lot of these people who talk on the internet, it is part of their social life, especially the ones that do it quite a lot. So I think they are getting something out of it, and that something might even be healthy, because if they didn't have that, they might do something less healthy, So, and also they are. I mean, if you talk about people like SJJ, they're sort of, they're responding to actual real problems in the world that they see. They're thinking about, there's something wrong with our societies. They're changing too fast. We don't know where this is going to lead. It looks all a bit unhealthy. Shouldn't we be asking questions? Why aren't we allowed to ask certain questions? Why is this movement being sort of pushed down a certain negative alleyway? Things like that. So these are all important questions to ask. And I think they're asked in many cases for legitimate reasons. But also, there are a lot of people who are terminally online and who are on social media or who are doing live streams or who are trying to do it for purposes of engagement and to have somebody notice them. And there are many famous cases of people who have kind of overdosed on that and have gone too far. And then you could say that it's harmed their life, and in many cases it has. But in other cases, some people have managed to make a living at it. And we are living in a kind of post mainstream media kind of environment now. So this is like a new era compared to the previous media. The previous media, it was very kind of controlled. It was all related to big publications. They had serious reputations, and it's much more of a free for all now. And if you're very good at it, you can become a Joe Rogan or a Tim Pool, and spout your crap at the very highest level. Or your genius insights, assuming it's not crap.
Just for comparison's sake, what percentage of porn stars, women who enter the pornography industry at age 18 to 22, would you guess were engaging in something that overall would be self-destructive?
Well, porn, prostitution. I mean, these are ways of making money sometimes. And in some countries, being a prostitute or doing a bit of porn, it's a phase some women go through. Sometimes, if they're from a very poor background, it can give them enough financial resources to lead a much better life than they otherwise would have. So, again, it does depend upon the circumstances and how much they do it and whether they can move on from it.
Would you agree with the idea that after we meet our basic needs, for most people, their primary drive is the drive for importance? And so if there is some validity to this, then I would expect it would have both explanatory and predictive value. What do you think?
Well, I think you're kind of referring to Maslow's hierarchy there, aren't you? So I think there's several stages in Maslow's hierarchy, and I guess self-esteem and self-actualization and being part of a group are all included there. I mean, why do people want to have high esteem? Probably because it has practical benefits as well. If you have high esteem, you can get what you want. You can, afford to eat. You can have a nice house. You can, fulfill your sexual desires more positively, etc. So, having high esteem in itself, is it really that enthralling? I'm not so sure, unless you're a complete narcissist. But it does have quite important secondary benefits.
So there was an academic who praised your analysis of Russia a few years ago. How much of a difference did that praise make to how you felt about yourself?
Not that much. I don't think it really made any difference. I mean, I say things because I think they're right, and if other people think they're right, then I think those other people are right. So that's the kind of the chain in that case. It's not like this article is a failure because nobody noticed it was correct. I mean, it's just I mean, obviously you try to do your best when you come up with an idea, when you write something, when you make something. You try to make sure it's accurate, it's truthful, it says something important, and sometimes you get it right, sometimes you don't get it so right. But you're pushing in the right direction for the right reasons, and it's not essential for people to recognize that. So yeah, it wasn't essential that some academics have occasionally cited some things I've written in a positive way.
So there are certain criticisms that I've received over much of my life that people from all over my life have echoed: irresponsibility, slipperiness, dishonesty, insecurity, attention seeking. Are there any common criticisms that you've received that have echoed throughout your life?
People sometimes think I'm too brusque or to the point, or ill-tempered even. Things like that sometimes get thrown at me, but I'm not really sure where they get those mistaken notions from.
How often do you feel out of control?
Out of control. It's very abstract. I mean, could you kind of help me to paint a mental picture here, Luke?
Yes. There was a pretty young woman who paid me some attention a few months ago, and then I couldn't stop bombarding her after that. Like, I was out of control. And that's probably happened 200 times in my life.
Yeah, but you realize that by being over eager, you're actually pushing the thing you desire further and further away.
And precisely, I was out of control. Like, I knew that, but I was out of control. Even though I was pushing what I wanted, I was out of control. I couldn't stop myself from doing something that was against my self-interest. And that's happened with hundreds of women in the course of my life. So that's an example of out of control.
But you were you aware that you were out of control?
I was aware.
Yeah, so you weren't totally out of control, and you were getting ready to be more in control, I would say.
Well, there have also been hundreds of times in my life when I looked at pornography, even though I knew it wasn't good for me, and I would feel worse about myself after doing it, but I couldn't stop myself.
Shame on you, Luke. Go and have a cold shower.
So those are two examples of what I experienced as out of control, where I was doing things that I knew were against my best interests. Also, slovenliness and sloppiness in my work product has at times been a problem, where I knew that I should be paying more attention to my work product, and I wasn't. So those are three examples now of out of control. So have you struggled with being out of control?
I'd have to say no to that. I don't think I've struggled with it. In fact, I have a hard time thinking of any examples. I mean, I guess when I was a teenager, I was a little bit out of control. And sometimes when you're in violent situations, you can be you have to be a bit out of control, really, because if you're sort of double guessing everything, and you won't be very good at reacting. So, I mean, there's certain situations where being out of control is actually the optimum response. You've got to be fast and instinctive. So therefore, you switch to something which is technically a sort of mind state of being out of control, because that gives you the best options for being in control.
Are there any thinkers / podcasters / live streamers who you have had some interest in, who seem to be largely immune from audience capture?
Well, audience capture would be when you have certain ideas, and then your audience, because of their predilections, they push you off your train of thought or your belief system, and you started to change, and your views are kind of distorted by your audience. I mean, I've seen many examples of that, I guess. You could see there are a lot of people in the alt-right who are basically like that. As soon as they started to get certain positive reactions to some things, they veered off in that direction. I mean, you could almost say that the majority of the alt-right, of the major people in the alt-right, fit into that kind of category. Was Richard Spencer such a Nazi to begin with? I don't think he was. But he noticed that, when he did certain things, when he said certain things, he got a much more positive response from all these various anonymous accounts and bots and God knows what than other times. I also noticed that when I said certain things, I would get very negative responses sometimes. For example, if I wrote something which was criticizing Russia back in the day, I'd noticed that suddenly all these anonymous accounts would pop up saying all sorts of negative things, sort of bad mouthing me and so on. And, that's a pretty obvious pattern to recognize when you're, involved with it. And so, I think there is a real thing with audience capture, but is it really audience? Because sometimes it's a little bit more than just an audience, I think.
But can you think of any personalities who seem to you most immune from this?
Well, I think most well-known live streamers or online personalities, they establish a certain kind of shtick which works, and they generally stick to their shtick. So I mean, Nick Fuentes has been Nick Fuentes now for quite some time. They have a certain audience that wants to hear a certain message, and that's what it's all about. And if you don't want to hear that message, you go and look for somebody else who's, saying a different message that you happen to like. And that's how this particular ecosystem seems to organize itself.
So a triple murderer, someone who'd already killed 3 people, showed up at Nick Fuentes' home armed. And if Nick Fuentes had opened the door to him, Nick would most likely be dead. Is there anything else to be learned from that?
Yeah, let's see. Well, apart from the obvious, nothing really, I guess. I mean, obviously, Nick has to consider his security. I think he was. There were cameras. I mean, he is armed with mace. Maybe he's got a gun somewhere. Who knows? I think he employs a bodyguard at certain times, doesn't he?
I would assume so. But what about also, this is the price of fame, but to what extent can famous people perhaps reduce their chances of murderers showing up outside their home, aside from the technical things of having a camera and being armed?
Well, they can try to be less famous. That might help, Try to be more boring, less incendiary. Try to get a different audience. Try to get a higher IQ audience, because I think if you have a higher IQ audience, that's not a fail-safe way to avoid nutters stalking you. But there'll be more intelligent nutters and possibly more dangerous because of that. But you'll probably have a much smaller audience, and so therefore the number of nutters will be less.
Why do you think classical musicians get shot a lot less than rappers?
Well, I think the musical canon is a lot less controversial in classical music because it's already been laid down and established, in the 19th century. And so, all those kind of tempestuous arguments that Brahms and Liszt and Beethoven and Mozart used to have long since abated.
Right. It seems to be an example of your previous point that when you appeal to a higher IQ audience, and the audience for classical music is on average much higher IQ than the audience for rap music, you're appealing to a higher IQ audience. Higher IQ people are more likely to accurately see the future and are less likely, therefore, to engage in behavior which is highly likely to damage their future, which means they're less likely to needlessly damage you. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would subscribe to that general idea. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Have we spoken since Donald Trump was elected?
I don't think we have we? No. That was. I think we were. I think I was confidently predicting his election, and then
I think we spoke on the day of the. I think we spoke on election day. Perhaps. So
did we? That's possible. Yeah.
Any thoughts on
check.
Donald on the American election? I think it was November 6th and Donald Trump's victory.
Yeah. I mean, now it seems to have been kind of inevitable. But at the time, the media was really trying to gaslight us, I remember. The worst example of that was the Iowa poll that they came out with a few days before the election. And suddenly Donald Trump was going to lose Iowa. And, they really got behind that. They were really pushing that as much as they could. So it was a major gaslighting operation. They thought that they could trick people into believing it, and that could destabilize the Trump campaign and then demotivate them and demoralize them, and while motivating all the various liberals and leftists and cat ladies to come out and vote. But in hindsight, yeah, it did seem to be quite the Donald Trump's election in 2024 does seem to have had the kind of aura of invincibility about it.
Why do you think the news media, the mainstream news media, was generally reluctant to cover Joe Biden's obvious senility, while for people on the right, it was obvious for years that Joe Biden had senility issues?
I would say it was because of the analogy of the oil tanker. It's they were on this massive oil tanker, and it was very, very hard to turn it around. And so they had to just go in the direction they had foolishly chosen to go in.
And now we're seeing some, or at least one mainstream journalist apologize for his lack of coverage of Joe Biden's diminishing mental capacity. Chris Cillizza used to be with CNN and the Washington Post. Now he's operating on his own. And there is an explanation from Commentary Magazine that to the extent that journalists apologize for their lack of coverage of Joe Biden's cognitive decline while in the office of the presidency, that it's really just clearing the decks for a ferocious attack or a ferocious attention paid to Donald Trump's age-related decline while in office. What do you think?
Well, I think, that says maybe, but I think what we're looking at here is a much more important structural point. And the point is that, America has a very serious political structural weakness, which is the position of the president. And if you compare this with Britain's a lot more politically nimble in cases like that. So if there's something wrong with the prime minister, it's a lot easier for the British to kind of yank them out and shove somebody else in. And I think with America, it's a lot harder to do that. There's too many people you have to square. There's too many people you have to get on board. And it's just a much bigger country, and there's all sorts of interest groups you've got to, vet and take the input from and so on. And, it becomes very, very awkward. So it's a lot easier just to stick with the status quo in a situation like that. And, okay, he's senile, but we could just, push through with this and try and cover it up, and changing him now, it wouldn't be a good idea, blah, blah, blah. So there's always reasons to just stick with the status quo. Whereas in Britain, if you look at how Liz Truss was kind of yanked out within a matter of weeks, you can see how efficient Britain is politically at, replacing broken parts.
Did the deep state in the United Kingdom, Deep Six, Liz Truss, or was it primarily her own incompetence?
Yeah, I kind of regret that we never got a chance to see exactly what Trussonomics would look like. It might have been quite exhilarating, but sadly, the British state, I mean, I'd have to say the British state is, it's a economically speaking, it's a semi-socialist country. And what she was going to try to implement would have, caused too much instability, presumably. And the markets didn't really like that. I mean, the markets are in favor of more capitalism, but they're more in favor of evolution rather than revolution. So I think they saw Liz Truss as a potential revolutionary figure in economic terms, and they wanted to get rid of her for that reason. So a lot of vested interests would have had their noses put out of joint.
So the parliamentary system is clearly superior to the presidential American system in some ways. Overall, do you think it's clear that the parliamentary system is superior to the American presidential system?
Well, it's very hard to talk about superior systems, but you've got to look at the end results. I think all our systems are failing because in developed, advanced Western countries, not even very developed countries, we're all facing the same problems, which is a demographic crisis. Even the Islamic Republic of Iran is facing a demographic crisis. So even trad religious societies are not doing so well. So we have a radical problem in the modern world, and I mean, we obviously need a radical government to solve it. But setting that aside, there are certain benefits and disadvantages to the various forms of democracy. I think in the American case, the political elite and the democratic voters, that's I shouldn't say that, just the voters, there seems to be quite a gap between the two. And the most important group in America's political equation seem to be various kinds of donor classes and rich elites who influence what politicians do. In the case of Britain, we have a bit of a difference from Europe. In Europe, they have proportional representation. Proportional representation is probably a lot more democratic than the Westminster first past the post system. So what happens is the views, the desires of the voters are much more immediately reflected, which means you can in Europe you can see the rise of various kinds of populist groups quite quickly. In Germany, the AfD is doing quite well, not as well as they hope, obviously, because I think they're about 15 to 20 in the polls. But that's something we don't have in Britain. We don't have these kind of populist groups yet upsetting the apple cart like they have done in various European countries. And that's because there's more distance between the voters and the elected. And that's caused by the Westminster system. So I guess if you put them on a scale, the American elites are further removed from the voters. The British are kind of intermediate, and the Europeans, the voters and the political elites are much closer together. And so that can cause, in the case of Europe, that can cause instability, because as soon as people start to favor one kind of politics, then politics will then radically veer off in that direction. Whereas in the case of America, there's a lot more inbuilt stability, but this creates a kind of a gerontocracy. It creates a kind of very corrupt political system, and we're starting to see this really extolled by Donald Trump. Donald Trump, he appears to be one of the most kind of corrupt politicians ever. He He's basically just selling all these offices of state to various people who bunged him large amounts of money. There's so much dark money in the American political system at the moment, and we're still trying to figure out where most of it comes from.
So my primary fears about the next Trump administration is that it will be incompetent and corrupt. Would that be true for you as well?
Yes, but it depends on the nature of the corruption. Because if it's just good old-fashioned, you scratch my back and I'll scratch your back kind of corruption, that won't be so bad. But I think a lot of the corruption is not like that. I think a lot of the corruption may be connected to much more agenda-driven groups and people.
Is there any state that you think does, I'm talking about nation state, that does a good job keeping their bureaucracy, government bureaucracy, accountable and under control?
Yeah, it's a hard one again, because you'd have to have a lot of in-depth knowledge about each and every government around the world. But you can definitely, I think in Britain, corruption's a lot harder than it is in America. Compared to the United Kingdom, I think our political class. I mean, we have a big scandal if somebody gets a couple of Taylor Swift tickets. And that's like what we're worried about in the UK. In Japan, they seem to keep things very tight as well. The corruption scandals do occasionally come out, but they don't seem to be very big, and they don't seem to be people who are trying to kind of completely distort the whole course of the nation. As is the case in America. Like in America, Donald Trump's campaign, there was so much money went into that from people like Elon Musk. There's all these super PACs. There's all this money which goes all over the place. And, it's almost blatant now. It's almost like, it's no big deal. People have got used to it. People have stopped worrying about it.
A lot of the people who listen to my shows have largely withdrawn from society, and their most fervent wish is for a cleansing civil war, for some, apocalyptic end times conflict. Do you have any experience with this type of personality and any analysis of what's going on?
The let it all burn down
Yes.
crowd.
Yes.
Well, the dissident right has always had a large number of people like that. And, in a way, it's understandable, because to do things politically is very hard, because you're very much constrained by the moronic and often self-contradictory desires of the masses. I mean, Britain's a perfect example yet again. Britain, people don't like immigration, but the whole economy is geared for it. Without immigrants doing various jobs, British people would have to work a lot harder. The NHS probably couldn't function. Several key industries would collapse. The sums just wouldn't work anymore. In fact, the whole economy would have to be radically rejigged to survive. So people are kind of hooked on immigration, but they hate it. And so, you can't really use democracy to solve problems, it seems, because even though people will make their wishes known, they'll often make other contradictory wishes known as well. So the idea that some politician can come in, present a certain line of argument and reform the country in a positive way that cures the nation of its demographic ills without collapsing the economy, and everybody's going to happily vote for them. That seems like a ridiculous pipe dream. But if things, reach a serious impasse that leads to some sort of economic or social collapse, then it'll be a lot easier to radically reform society. So there is an element of common sense in that view. But I think most people really want that to happen after they kick the bucket.
There's a terrific novelist, Richard Russo, who writes books, stories about industrial towns where the industry that funds the town and employs the town is simultaneously killing the town with toxic chemicals, toxic waste that's giving a disproportionate number of people cancer. And so this dual impact thing that's both simultaneously keeping you alive and killing you, I think is a profound insight. Do you have any favorite contemporary novelists? Are you still there, Colin?
Yeah, hi. Yeah. No, I don't read much fiction, Luke. So, and if I do, it's usually something quite old and arcane.
Okay, got it. There's a favorite conspiracy theory that Barack Obama has been running the Democratic Party from behind the scenes. He's the first president in 100 years who didn't leave Washington, D.C. after his presidential term ended. My analysis is that Obama is too lazy to be running things behind the scenes. Obama, 90% of his reading is fiction. That's what brought this point to mind rather than nonfiction. What do you think about the idea that Barack Obama has been secretly running the Democratic Party and the left from behind the scenes since Trump's first victory in 2016?
Yeah, this is a bit like the idea that Tony Blair has been running the Labour Party in Britain from behind the scenes. So I don't know. It's a theory. You've got to find the evidence for it. You've got to verify the evidence. I don't think people who believe in these theories like to do the hard work of checking into these theories and making them stick. The conspiracist mindset is incredibly lazy. I mean, I encountered this when I was associated with Andy Nowicki. Andy was a great lover of every dog-eared conspiracy theory that popped up. And but when I asked him to back it up, do a bit of research, find some solid evidence for it, he wasn't so keen. So I think that's basically what conspirators are like. They just like to believe in stuff. It's an act of faith, really, rather than research. So, if somebody can, prove that Obama is pulling all the strings, good luck to them. But I don't think I'm going to hold my breath there.
So when people embrace baseless, ridiculous conspiracy theories, I think it reveals something profound about them, is that they're desperately looking for a basis to feel more important than everyone else. And when they find a conspiracy theory, that they get a great deal of comfort and strength from believing that they see through the bullshit. What do you think?
That's part of it, yeah. But I think a lot of it is a genuine desire to misunderstand the world. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these theories that people believe in help them to paint a picture of reality with the extremely limited intellectual colors on their palette.
British members of parliament seem to me, on average, to be a standard deviation more intelligent than American members of Congress, but yet not one whit more effective. What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, from my perspective, British politicians have been on a downward trajectory during my life. When I think back, a lot of the politicians were actually quite, intellectual, quite intelligent. They said things at a higher IQ level, etc., etc. And they do seem to be getting a bit more, American, shall we say. Meanwhile, America, it seems to be becoming a giant offshore loony farm, from what I can tell.
I want to talk about Elon Musk, and I'm struck how he embodies a common trend, and that is you take one aspect of somebody's personality and think that sums them up. So you have a lot of people who dismiss Elon Musk as a con man, and there is definitely a strong element of con man in Elon Musk, but he is far more formidable than that. I think many of his postings are regrettable and careless and self-destructive, but he's also an incredibly important figure, and you can't just dismiss him on the basis that he does display some con man characteristics. Any thoughts on Elon Musk and his what appears to be growing political influence and his close relationship with Donald Trump?
Yeah, well, I think Musk is an inconsistent character. Like before, he was very much a bit of a lefty, bit of a green-friendly lefty, and that kind of served his purposes because he was promoting these very ecologically unfriendly electric vehicles, which rely upon all this, weird battery technology, which is actually highly polluting. But at the time, he used to be. I think he also was against Donald Trump 8 years ago. He was. I think he walked out on on some sort of government thing he was doing with Donald Trump. And also, he used to. I remember when the war in the Ukraine started, he was a big supporter of the Ukraine initially, and then suddenly something happened, and then he wasn't, and he was much more pushing the Kremlin narrative on the Ukraine. So it's not, it's very hard to say who the real Elon Musk is, and you've got to look for explanations why he would radically change some of his positions and his views. So, apparently. And so either, he's a very unhinged individual who just, completely flips from time to time, or else, there's an element of coercion involved. You've got to try to at least hypothesize a explanation for his inconstancy.
Any thoughts on the fall of Assad in Syria?
Yeah, it's pretty bad for Israel, I have to say.
On what basis?
Well, I think Assad was. I would say Assad was performative anti-Israeli or anti-Zionism. Performative anti-Zionism. That was what Assad was. And, he wasn't really opposed to Israel because he couldn't be. He was too busy oppressing his own people. And the Syrian people didn't like him for whatever reasons, because his father was a completely brutal and sadistic tyrant. And he was more or less the same. And they were part of an unpopular minority group. And the majority Sunni population, they were pushed down by this minority. And so I think Syria was always much weaker than it could have been. And that was quite convenient for Israel on one level because Syria was weak, it was off balance, it was unstable, it could be easily slapped around, let's say. On the other side, of course, it was part of this so-called Shiite corridor. It was one of the things that enabled Hezbollah to operate effectively. But even there, I don't think Syria was essential to the existence of Hezbollah. Hezbollah could still have got most of what they wanted without access routes through Syria. So I don't think it made that much difference in the long run. But what Assad's regime did do, it did weaken and divide the nation of Syria. And now that Syria is, more or less united, and it's going to be brought increasingly, I think, under the control of this new guy, al-Gulani, who now wants to drop his nom de guerre and go back to his original name. Now that it's under his control, I think we're going to see a lot more Turkish influence. Turkey is a big, powerful Sunni country. Syria's a Sunni majority country. They're going to unite the country. They're going to stabilize it, and then they're going to bring back a lot of their population, hopefully. So that's going to create economically, politically, and eventually militarily a much more powerful neighbor for Israel. And then that might, alter the balance of power and the situation in the Middle East. It won't be immediate, of course, but in the long run, I think it's a little bit worrying for Israel.
How big of a threat is Turkey to what you care about and the civilizations that you care about?
Turkey?
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, what's wrong with Turkey? I mean, I don't particularly like Turkey. I've been to Turkey. It's not a terrible place. I don't think. A lot of people don't like Turkey. I can understand that. They exaggerate its Islamic nature. It has veered towards Islam in the last 20, 30 years, I guess. But it's still very much a modern country. Probably it's got many of the same problems as a lot of European countries.
Would it be fair to describe the German Alternative for Germany party as a fascist party?
No, I don't think they're a fascist party. I think they're much more. The problem with the AfD is they're much more of a kind of Russia shill party, like a lot of these populist right-wing movements in Europe.
What percentage of white people in America explicitly care about white identity, in your estimation?
The ones that live in mixed race areas, I guess. There's probably different types of people that, it depends on demographics and also the pattern of demographics. People that live up in, very white New England probably don't really think about race that much because it's not really in their face very much. People in these kind of little Midwestern towns don't think about it too much. But if you're in a city, you're probably much more racially aware. And then, of course, you probably think about race all the time in some places.
Do you think I'm accurate that if you talk about white interests and white identity, you will be regarded as a freak and very possibly a terrorist by the educated classes in America and the United Kingdom?
I think that used to be very much the case, say about 20 years ago. And then, during the period when the alt-right started to rise up, it was, sort of expressing things that people did want to talk about. People were starting to think, wait a minute, this race stuff, it's real and it's there and we should be able to talk about it. But also at that particular stage, the whole thing was very much repressed and frowned upon. And there was a lot of kind of like race realism, gaslighting going on, but that was more like a sign that race was becoming an issue and race was becoming something that normal people were thinking about more and more. So I think nowadays, if you talk about race as long as you talk about it in certain ways, I don't think people will really regard you as that odd. So I think things have changed, and it's becoming more, kind of Overton window to talk about racial questions and mass immigration and assimilation and the border and border control. These are all becoming increasingly mainstream topics. So I think it's definitely changed, though.
Are there any pop musicians from the last 10 years who you listen to? With pleasure.
No, I'm still listening to all that old stuff from the 80s and 90s.
To the extent there's a fascist threat to democracy right now, where would you locate it?
China.
Erdogan, the leader of Turkey, would you classify him primarily as an Islamist or primarily as a nationalist?
I'd say he's primarily a cunning politician who wants to stay in power as long as possible and is doing quite a good job at it. I don't really think a lot of these people are sincere. There's a form of audience capture going on. What happens is, these politicians, they undergo audience capture, but then they kind of weaponize their own instance of being captured by their audience against their audience. So they turn tables on the audience that captures them.
And what do you expect from a second Trump term, aside from corruption and incompetence?
Well, those are the two things I was going to reply with there, Luke. So thank you very much for pushing them to one side. I think it's going to be, I think a lot of plastic surgery, a lot of facelifts, a lot of badly decorated interiors. Just a lot of, it's going to make America look like a freak show, I think. That's probably what it's going to do. I mean, not that America hasn't looked like a freak show in the past, but yeah, I think it's going to really accentuate that aspect of America as a bit of a circus country.
What movie have you watched more times than any other?
I mean, honestly, I couldn't tell you, but I'm just trying to think of one that might be a contender. Yeah, it's like once you watch a movie, it's hard to watch it again for quite a while, isn't it?
Well, for me, about 5 years. I can 5 to 8 years. I can usually, like Chariots of Fire, probably watch that every 8 years.
Yeah, I mean, like Bond movies, I guess. And I end up watching some Bond movies more times than I should, I suppose. Certain historical epics, I find them worth rewatching from time to time. I mean, my favorite movie when I was a kid was Taras Bulba, starring Yul Brynner and Tony Curtis. So that springs to mind.
If you want to relax and just enjoy yourself, so I would turn to a movie or a TV show or TV sports. What do you do when you just want to relax and enjoy?
Probably read a book. Just get a nice book with all full of information and factual stuff that I don't actually know that well, and then just gonna lose myself in the very, very relaxing process of absorbing information.
How many hours a week would you listen to podcasts / live streams?
On average, I guess about 5 or 6. Usually doing something else, have it on in the background. 5 or 6 hours a week, sometimes more, sometimes less.
And how many hours a week would you spend reading books?
More than that, I think. Probably 7 or 8.
And any book that you've read in 2024 that you would like to recommend?
Well, I mean, that would be a big effort to remember to sort of dredge up all the books I've read this year. But the one I'm reading at the moment, I would recommend, which is The Life of Gladstone by what's his name, Roy Jenkins. Roy Jenkins is Gladstone. It's quite an interesting. Well, he's a good writer. It's a little bit wordy. It could have been, probably edited down by a couple of hundred pages, but some parts of it are repetitive. But, it sort of gives you a very clear picture of Gladstone. And in case your listeners don't know who that was a very important British prime minister from the 19th century who started out as a conservative and then became a Peelite and ended up as a, quite a radical liberal.
Has news and opinion consumption in Japan gone sliced into more and more micro audiences to the same extent as England and the United States, or do the mainstream media, TV networks, and newspapers still command the dominant attention span of the Japanese?
Yeah, I would say that the mainstream media is surviving better in Japan than it is in the West. Newspapers still have very large circulations. Whether people read them or not, they certainly buy them.
Are there any Westerners who you think have done a good job describing and revealing Japan? For example, there's the TV series Tokyo Vice, based on a book, a memoir by Jake Adelstein, who supposedly was the first foreigner employed by a major Japanese newspaper.
I wouldn't cite that really. That just seems a bit sensationalist and not really deep analysis of Japanese society. Of course, Jared Taylor is well known for his book on Japan as well. I actually have that book, but I haven't got round to reading it for whatever reason. So I can't.
I didn't know he wrote a book. When did that come out? Shadows of the Rising Sun. Is that him?
That's Jared Taylor. Yeah.
Oh yeah, 1983. Shadows of the Rising. Critical view of the Japanese miracle. So he must have been ahead of his time then.
Well, it's mainly because he is actually Japanese, as you know, because he was born in Japan, so that makes him Japanese.
Yeah, you can see just by looking at him, there's a certain slant.
Yep, he's definitely got that, Mandarin aura about him.
Yep. Okay, anything else you want to add as we wind up? Have you been watching the Millennial Woes Christmas thing? I have not. Have you? Anything good?
No, me neither. Well, I think I sort of had a quick look, and it was. I think I had a brief listen to Greg Johnson, and I thought, that could be like 10 years ago. The stuff he's saying, it's the same old shtick that he always says. I think I maybe listened to one or two others just briefly, and then I just found it a bit cringe and boring. And I immediately went straight back to SSJ Mass.
SJJ Mass. And do you have some favorite episodes from that Titanic series?
Well, there was quite a good one on today. Of course, that was a classic. I forget who it was. It was some old guy, some old boomer. He got on, I don't know, one of the alt-right OGs, so he was quite entertaining.
Do you find it painful growing older?
Well, if it causes something to go wrong, yes. Like if, bits of you start falling off, or you pull a muscle, or whatever. Yeah, it can be. So be careful, Luke.
Okay. Well, thanks, Colin. Great to talk to you, man.
Right. Cheers.
Cheers,
Bye-bye.
mate. Bye. Talk to you later. Okay. Kip, you've been on hold for over an hour. You still around there, Kip?
I am. Mic check. Is the new mic coming in okay?
Oh, yeah. That sounds so much better. I love it.
Does it? Son of a biscuit eater. You got famous all of a sudden, bro. I felt like I was at Heathrow or Haneda waiting on a flight or something. You know how they do the in Tokyo, where Colin comes from, they got that stick that they shove them in the trains with. You ever seen them do that?
Yeah, people often object to the way I've conducted my interviews or whatever, because I put the show first. I wanted to extract Colin, everything that I wanted to get through with Colin, and then I want you. And so I often move people in and out and around and make some people wait and move some people on and off. And it's quite a challenge for people's egos. What did you experience? Was it infuriating? Was it? What did you experience as you were waiting on hold, essentially?
Is lividity a word?
I didn't know. Don't think so. What does that mean?
Livid, absolutely livid.
Okay.
I was thinking Luke Ford thinks Colin Liddell is too highbrow for a Sunday morning rap from Kip, but it could be the exact opposite. It could be that the rap I had lined up that I was gonna. I basically had the rap you were supposed to do for Stephen J. James, right? And he caught you flat-footed, and you didn't have anything ready, did you?
I don't think he caught me flat-footed, and
yes,
I
he
didn't.
did.
Okay, tell me more.
Tell me more. You into the show that do you have a song? Do you have a song or something that you want to share with the class? And
well, I mean, if he'd asked me to show my penis, I wouldn't have shown my penis. So just because I didn't display my penis or sing a song, I don't think I'm flat-footed. I'm just discreet. I'm a very respectable man, Kip.
Oh, 10-4. Well, you want to hear a Sunday morning rap, or should we move on?
Sure. No. I'm tell me anything you want to say, bro. You can even sing a song, I think.
Thinking of a master plan. This ain't nothing but sweat inside Luke's hand, so he digs into his pocket. All his money is spent, so he digs deeper, still coming up with lint. So he starts his mission, leaves his residence, thinking, how could Luke get some dead presidents? He needs money. He used to be a stick-up kid, but he thought of all the devious things he did. He used to roll up. This is a holdup. Ain't nothing funny. Stop smiling. He still don't nothing move but the money. But now Luke's learned to earn cause he's righteous. He feels great, so maybe he might just search for a 9-to-5. If he strives, then maybe he'll stay alive. So he walks up the street, whistling this, feeling out of shape, because man, does he miss a pen and a paper, a stereo, a taper. Me and Luke Ford and a nice big plate of fish, which is his favorite dish. But without no money, it's still a wish. Because Luke don't like to dream about getting paid, so he digs into the books of the rhymes that he's made. Now's the test, see if he's got pull. Hit the studio, because Luke's paid in full. Now, do you feel paid in full, buddy?
Bro, that was amazing. You're a poet.
It's not me. Let's see if anybody in the chat knows who I've just ripped off on your behalf for this Sunday afternoon jam. Does anybody? Is there glib? Anybody? Do we have anybody from the nutter intellectual rap community besides me?
Nobody. Where does that come from?
Son of a biscuit eater. That's the great Rakim from about 1984, 1985. And if there's a Mount Rushmore of rap, this is before it got renamed hip hop, he would be on the Mount Rushmore of rap. With some of my other favorites were Chuck D of Public Enemy, also someone I don't think you're going to recognize. And then there's a few more, but I can't think of them right now. I'm still so disgusted about sitting on the sidelines. I feel like I was always a catcher in baseball, and I feel like somebody was in there playing catcher, and they were striking out, and motherfuckers were stealing second base and all that kind of stuff. But I can't say that about Colin Liddell, because actually you weren't on with him long enough for our belief system to have any kind of conflict. You know what I mean? So there was nothing he said I could ever be stroppy about. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And what about Stephen J. James? What's your reaction to him?
I like Stephen. I think what caught you sideways today, where you were second guessing yourself, is the fact that your creative juices, they're just not flowing 168 hours a week. But guess what? Internally, what time of the week you're geared up to give the good stuff out? It's Sunday morning, isn't it?
Yeah, that's usually my best.
You get what I'm saying? So I guess where I'm going with that is I'm thinking that had Stephen J. James asked you for a Wednesday or a Thursday interlude instead of prime time Sunday morning, I don't think you would be having any of these conflicting feelings. Tell me where I'm wrong. As your therapist, tell me where I'm wrong.
I think you're wrong in that the topics that he raises and the way that he raises them, there is only socially a downside for me with explicitly engaging with them.
I get what you're saying. He's the one running the rodeo. He's got the whip. You don't know where the hell it's going.
Well, I kind of do, and I know it's bad for me.
Oh, okay. Also, I felt like the other reason, because I was like, where's this coming from? I feel like you probably better than yourself. You can't. There's obstructions you can't see that I can from afar. And I was wondering if maybe pulling the double show duties got 40 feeling discombobulated. You know what I mean? And you're like, that's what it is. You were trying to like close the chapter on the first show, and now you're trying to do your bread and butter. And I think you got it together, by the time Colin was on the scene. But I think you might have been feeling discombobulated. Maybe that's what. But you're saying, no, that's not it.
No, I think it's the opposite of that. It's not that I'm discombobulated. I feel very much standing on my own 2 feet. I feel very clear. I feel tired, but I don't feel discombobulated. So I'll have to look up the meaning discombobulated. Okay, confused and disconcerted. So no, it's the opposite. I felt a great deal of clarity, and it was a painful clarity that explicitly engaging with certain topics and the way that they are raised has nothing but downsides for me. And so that made me feel sad because it reduces the size of the Overton window for me.
Mm-hmm. And I was, now I get discombobulated because I feel the pressure of being on the air and performing with you in front of your minions, right? So it's hard for me to think back to what exactly Colin gave for this reason. But I'll just say personally, the reason I talk to you and the reason I used to rail against AIPAC or whatever in the local rags where I lived, that was all about therapy. That was all about getting it out in the ether. In the same way, Colin didn't use these exact terms, but he was talking about how he wanted to get something on paper before it leaves the ether of his mind. And I know I've done that. I know if nothing else, I start writing down bullet points, before those thoughts start being exchanged with new thoughts. So I don't know. That's where I think a lot of that comes from. You get what I'm saying? A lot of that. Why do people do this? Are they trying to lose their life or whatever? I think, frankly, they don't realize they're so far upstream from mainstream thinking. Does that make sense, Luke?
Well, I think we create a life and then we try to justify it. So you've created an isolated life and then you conduct yourself online so as to perpetuate that and to remove choice from an isolated life.
10-4. You think I've what? Created what?
You have created an isolated life, and with your commentary, you ensure that it would be very difficult for you to move from an isolated life.
So the idea of like just looking for sanity and what I feel is sort of an insane world, that we're kind of all the morals and ethics have sort of inverted or whatever. You know what
Yeah,
I
I
mean?
think you're externalizing that you recognize, at least subconsciously, that there's all sorts of insanity within you, but that's too painful to deal with, so you externalize it onto the world.
Yeah, feel free. I mean, feel free. If we're talking and you like see like a piece of insanity, say, pause. Whoa, Kip, right there. Back up 5 seconds. That was fucking insane what you just said. Be sure and point it out for me, as I would hope anybody, Cal, Kimadov, anybody in the comments. If I go over the line into Crazyville and start saying some Building 7 World Trade Center shit, stop me dead in my tracks. Smack me if I'm within, if you can reach me, smack me in the back of the head. We used to call that a hookup in the Marines. But you mentioned movies. What movies? Yes. Used Cars from 1979. Do you remember that movie?
I do not.
Okay. I'm trying to think of who all the main characters were, but I just remember no movie made me laugh like that movie. Now, some of the stuff I remember, maybe I watched it 5-6 years ago, and some of the stuff that makes me laugh still works, but some of the stuff now is just looking at that stuff from 1975, those triple Windsor knots on the ties, on the neckties that they wear and that kind of stuff. We moved on so far from that. And just the sentimentality from everybody. Everybody's so PC and full of shit now. It's refreshing. It's refreshing to see some of those older shows where everybody is more plain spoken, like what you say you appreciate about, I guess, people like me or people from the South or whatever, where we're not so damn filtered, for the masses.
Yeah, Americans used to be known as a plain spoken people.
Mm-hmm. Also, that movie Pulp Fiction, I don't know, maybe it just speaks to the pothead in me or whatever, but I just thought that was had good scenes. I don't know if it's I'm not a movie file, so I couldn't tell you if it was a great movie, but I'm just thinking, you had asked what movies did you find yourself watching again and again to Colin, and those were two that I had thought about that just kind of jumped to mind right when you said it, but you had any you want to add to the mix? Because you didn't share.
So for me, Cinema Paradiso, which I think came out about 1989, I probably watched it 6 times. Chariots of Fire, probably watched that 5 times. A Perfect Day, is that the Kevin Costner movie? I probably watched that day. Is that Kevin Costner? Perfect Day, yeah. A Perfect World, I probably watched that 3 times. Any other movies that you've repeatedly watched that come to mind that you love?
Not really. And Colin, again, he and I were a lot alike because I thought of myself in the library. I never went to the fiction section. It did not occur to me that someone could actually make a point to you by using fiction. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Maybe they lived in a country where you couldn't say things outright or whatever. So that kind of stuff never occurred to me. So I'm kind of like Colin in the regard that I never even drifted towards fiction or whatever. But what was I going to say?
Wait, a couple of other movies came to me. A Man for All Seasons. So that was my favorite movie probably up until about age 20. I saw that as around age 10, and it just left a huge imprint on me. And Legends of the Fall, starring Brad Pitt. I love that movie. I cried through the last half of that movie. It was soon after I came to Los Angeles in the spring of 1994. And when the mother dies, it just really hit me because my mother died when I was 3. And then I love the movie Big Fish because it reminds me so much about my relationship with my father. I love the movie Love Story, which makes me cry. Do you have any movies that make you cry?
I don't know, Luke. Brad Pitt, Kevin Costner, A Love Story. You might be gay, bro.
I don't want to have sex with them. If you don't want to have sex with them, it's not gay, bro.
Okay. Yeah. I've never I mean, that would make me as uncomfortable as hell. If it was true, that story you told about the dude that put you up for a couple of weeks, wanting to suck your cock or whatever. It's like, God dang, man. Why? I would hate to be put in that situation.
You've never been placed in that situation?
No. I guess I don't. I used to have a friend named Skip, and the gays really liked him, and he got put in that situation all the time. But for something about me, I got a hairy ass or something, I'm not putting off that vibe that you and my buddy Skip put off. I don't know what you're doing wrong. And maybe it's not, maybe it's something that you're doing right. You know, some people just lean into that shit and think they'll just have twice as much fun as they used to have. But
did you see A Man for All Seasons, 1966 Oscar winner for Best Picture?
No.
Have you seen Chariots of Fire? Another
First
Oscar winner.
My mom drug me to was called Dr. Zhivago, and it didn't make any sort of impression on me whatsoever. I guess I was too little.
So Chariots of Fire didn't make any impression on you?
I mean, the soundtrack, that dun, 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 that's that movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where there's slow motion running a race in 1950s looking European running garb.
1920s, they're running on the beach.
Yeah. I know. But yeah, I don't think I was that deep back then. You get what I'm saying?
So Cinema Paradiso, did you ever see that Italian film?
No, when was that?
1988. What about A Perfect World starring Kevin Costner? Did you ever see that?
No, I do remember a movie from 1988, 87 called Shattered that I watched about 4 or 5 times. That was one of these, I ain't going to say it because maybe one of your people will want to see it, but it was a movie called Shattered. And then you think something's going on, and then they flip the script at the end, and you're like, whoa, I didn't even see that coming. And those movies are cool. I guess you would call it a thriller. A thriller is probably a type of genre that I like to see.
After a horrific car wreck leaves him amnesiac, a man slowly begins to unravel his shocking past.
Yeah. And I like comedies. So I guess Caddyshack. Now that we've kind of been talking about movies, Caddyshack is probably one of those movies that I've had on for a dozen, in much the same way that we used to put on Atlanta Braves games in the background, when we were doing something else. So a movie like Caddyshack, I'd probably put something like that on the background. Can I rap with you a little bit about?
Wait, one more question, and then we'll hit Nick Fuentes. When was the last time that you cried?
I cried about 4 or 5 weeks ago when I listened to Coat of Many Colors from Dolly Parton. She gets me. She gets me. You would think those big titties and stuff would smack you out of it, but I mean, I know she's putting on a production. You know what I mean? I know she's doing that, basically acting, but it's so good because the acting, what she's actually talking about is her own fucking mama, and it's probably something that you can't relate to, but I can. So, that would be the last thing that's really a tearjerker for me. So I'm just that way. But yeah, can I mention about Fuentes?
Yes.
Okay. And this is hard. I'm going to try to recapture the vigor that maybe I had over the last 48 hours when I got to thinking about this, because it was somewhere more than a day ago, but less than 2. But I got to thinking that he's harassed 24/7 by dozens of people since being doxxed like last week. Apparently, he made the comment, instead of my body, my choice, maybe he said, your body, my choice.
Mm-hmm.
And, for you and me, that rolls off us like water off a duck's back. You know what I mean? We think nothing about it. But apparently it started this onslaught of people acting like he's Elvis, you know what I mean? Driving around nonstop around his house. So anyway, where am I going this? Harassed by cops too after defending his domicile from these loons. I think he was actually arrested. And all the harassers, from the cops to the online crazies to the guy that actually ended up killing 3 people and 2 dogs that day, they can all have Patreon accounts. They can all bank anytime they want. They can all have their credit cards processed. They aren't being denied any services. This is bullshit, Luke Ford. He has not committed a fucking crime. You get where I'm going with you is these corporations has overstepped their fucking boundaries. Now you're talking about the same way I was bitching to you about with Trump when they canceled the president from Twitter and Facebook. Now that's the public square. That's beyond the pale.
So what's an appropriate level of anger for you about this situation? Let's say that it's objectively true that Nick Fuentes is being treated unfairly. What's your level of anger about this on a 1 to 10, and what should be your level of anger about this on a 1 to 10?
Initially, it was a 10 because I could really care less about Nick Fuentes. The thing is, call him in for something. If he is a bad person, show me the rule on the book that he broke. You know what I'm saying? Show me the rule that says that the man can't have a bank account. Show me the rule that he broke that says he's not even deserving of being able to have a Patreon. And incidentally, you want to know what could be? You want to know some of the reasons that you and I might be missing on why Bitcoin is $100,000 a freaking coin? It's because it's the only way out of the goddamn matrix of finances. You get what I'm saying? It's the only way to circumvent the thing. And you and I know if we were doing something nefarious, they can go back and look at all our transactions. So I'm telling you, it's not completely anonymous like people initially thought it is, but it's a way, crypto coins is a way for somebody can support Nick Fuentes for his private security or his moving expenses or whatever, if they feel the need, if they're feeling so froggy and that's what they want to do. But what I'm saying is, this is not right. This is the corporations going way beyond their control. And I think back to originally corporations in America, I think were like put together as like a corporation to like build a bridge, basically something good for a municipality or a state or the country or whatever. And then they were basically dissolved after that. And we've gotten to the point to where a man can't even have a bank account. He can't even do any kind of financial transactions unless he goes to the underworld of cryptocurrencies. Now that's bullshit. Come on now.
So you realize this has nothing to do with banks and everything to do with political legislation and political pressure. So it's not banks who are seeking to debank people. They are simply reacting to the incentives created by the Obama administration and the bureaucracy and legislation that was put in place there.
Why is people not coming to his defense and doing sort of a Kyle Rittenhouse type of deal where they start hauling these motherfuckers in court? And
because the very judicial system that you want to haul them into court has been adjusted to do this very thing, right? It's not banks who are just arbitrarily choosing to debank. Banks are responding to the incentives created by the Obama administration, set in place by the Obama administration, and continued by banking legislation and bureaucratic oversight of banks that forces banks to debank people.
We're 80% of the way there from just like what they do in China, where if your social credit score isn't good enough, you can't use planes. You'll have to fly on trains. You can't bank anywhere. We're almost there. We're almost there.
Has there ever been a society where what is effectively your social credit score hasn't limited what you get to do? I mean, I can't even fathom the possibility of having any kind of society where your social credit score does not limit your options.
You are late. You got to America late, so you might know this. Is it First or Second Amendment? Which one is free speech?
First Amendment.
Is he not guaranteed that?
Right, but he's not guaranteed freedom from repercussions for what he says. There's never been a society, there can never be a society where you are free from repercussions of what you say.
So lawful people can be denied vital services like banking. I would say that's a vital service.
I'd say it's a vital service too. And yes, it was set up, deliberate legislation put into effect by the Obama administration and never undone. So it's not that the banks are just arbitrarily deciding to debank people because of their political views. They have to respond to banking legislation, just like there was a Community Reinvestment Act that forced banks to extend loans to people who are not creditworthy and to open up branches that were uneconomical. Right? This was political legislation forcing banks to do all sorts of things against their economic interests that caused the global financial crash of 2007, 2008. Right? Banks weren't seeking to extend mortgage loans to people who are unlikely to pay them back. Banks weren't seeking to open bank branches in areas where it'd be uneconomical to do so. Banks had to do that as a result of political legislation, just like banks are being forced to debank people because of political legislation.
Just between me and the lamppost, back around 2000, it was Alan Greenspan himself that sat down with all the bankers, and he told all of us, he said, go ahead and get creative. We want you to expand home ownership here in America. And what was really happening, maybe it was 2001, what really happened is like after 9/11, I think we took everybody's home equity to like stave off what ended up happening in 2008. You get what I'm saying? But 2000 and 2001 and 2002, the government was asking lenders to get creative and get out there and make more homeowners, get out there and tap into that home equity. And by God, the banks did it. And they took home ownership from like 61% of Americans to like 69, almost 70%.
And how much choice? How much choice did the banks have?
I don't know.
Very little. It was legislated by those who had the power to put them out of business. They were forced to do it. They were forced to extend loans to people who are unlikely to pay them back.
But you see, that's how we accelerated the problem that we got into now, because the banks started using themselves. They used the Fed as the backstop. I mean, the Treasury. So when they got all those bad loans on the book, they just said, we'll take those bad loans and take you back to zero. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, they were played for suckers. They were suckers for a rigged system set up by the United States government that created a problem where there had never been a problem before. So commercial mortgage loans were incredibly solid, reliable part of the economy, and it was destroyed by the United States government pushing affirmative action with regard to loans.
Right. Until then, yeah, you're right. In fact, if you want to get to the actual point, and maybe it was 1999, you can look it up sometime. Long-term capital management, that particular bailout that had cascaded at that time, I think it was only like a $5 billion fuck up, but it had cascaded out so broadly across the financial spectrum that was where the first time they had that impulse to just like save them. And then we've done it for what, $35 trillion worth of that shit from 1990.
Oh, it wasn't the first time. I mean, they were doing it in the 1930s. So it's I don't know what nation does it successfully, but it's incredibly hard to regulate banks. And the United States has gotten into trouble here again and again. And it's not like the obvious solution is just more regulation. And it's not like the obvious solution is less regulation. It has to be appropriate legislation. And again, we've had this problem. And the Affirmative Action Community Reinvestment Act was the killer disaster of all disasters. But also the home loans that were cost billions and billions of dollars, where we set up these loan societies. John McCain and other politicians pushed this, and then bailing out savings and loans was an epic disaster. It's happened again and again because you cannot have a first world nation without a financial sector. So a lot of my viewers hate lending money at interest, but they are never able to name any country where that doesn't happen that they'd like to live in. And so if you want to have a prosperous nation, you have to have a solid financial sector that is based in large part on the lending out of money at interest. And if you don't want that, then go live in North Korea.
This shit though that they're doing, that they did to Nick Fuentes, not the people harassing him, but I'm talking about the corporations. This mentality that we saw really kind of festering when that Brian Williams CEO got assassinated. It's just kind of where it's coming from. You get what I'm saying? This whole
No, it's not. The corporations are making these. The corporations are not making these decisions. These corporations are bending to the demands of the bureaucrats who have the power to shut them down. Corporations have no say here. It's like you're blaming someone who's a slave for doing what his slave owner tells him.
Yeah. Well, I think they could decide to say we're not going to do it. They could.
Yeah, and then they'd be shut down. Then they'd be shut down.
I don't know, Luke. But anyway, let's see here. I'm going to pull away from that, even though I think we've got more to discuss there. And I'd like to talk to you about the other night. Elliot mentioned them queer, colorful crosswalks that they have in San Francisco and everywhere else. We've got them here in Tennessee too. And what I want to say about them, I want to say that those things have opened Pandora's box, because let's say, for example, I know you like tying your girlfriends up and peeing on them, right? And
is that bad?
No, that's not bad. But my point is, you too want your own flag. You want your own fucking holidays. You want your own crosswalks. You get what I'm saying? You want what the bread and butter queer community has got already. Where are your flags? You get what I'm saying?
Exactly. Yeah.
Where's all your accoutrement? You get what I'm saying with all this?
Yeah. Where's the respect for my lifestyle and for my choices and for my identity? All right. My identity revolves around a particular form of expression of love, and yet it gets no respect. And here's my Pandora's box that I got trapped in. It was the second woman that I ever had sex with. So when I was just with one woman, I could physiologically, emotionally kind of see myself just being with one woman for the rest of my life. But once I road tested that second woman, then I was just off to the races. I mean, then I was just sliding away to a considerable period of promiscuity because it was just so damn exciting.
Yes. See, man.
And yet I get no holidays, right? There are no flags celebrating my identity as, a promiscuous bloke.
Yeah, I got the same way one summer with black girls, went through like a little black girl phase or whatever.
Yep.
Anyway, but it's not just you and your love for wanting to pee on your woman. Not that you want everybody to be okay with it. You understand.
I want him to celebrate.
That's right. You know that there's only this transgender represents, 2 out of every 1,000. Well, guess what? There's 2 Luke Fords that want to tie their woman up and pee on them. There's 2 of y'all for every 1,000. So I'm saying they've opened Pandora's box. And where's your crosswalk? Also, for me, I'm left-handed. I don't have those sexual kinks you do, but I'm left-handed. Think about how many hundreds of times I've opened up a spiral notebook and had that metal just jamming onto my left hand every time I try to write something, try to write some beautiful poetry or something. Bullshit. You got pain, agony the whole time. Every time I get into a fucking car. Oh, you need your right hand to take the emergency brake. You need your right hand to turn the key on. You need your right hand to adjust the climate control. You better be right-handed if you want to control the radio. Luke, that's bullshit. You see, that's systemic. That's systemic straight from the top. I want my fucking flags. I want my holidays. I want my crosswalks. This is bullshit. Give me some feedback. Tell me why I'm wrong on this, sir.
Yeah, my feedback is that is a less useful lens than instead switching to just noticing why certain groups have exalted status and more status than other groups. So it's more useful to ask, how has the gay community been so successful at revolutionizing the status of gays in America? So some groups have been very successful at changing America, and it's worth asking why. How did they do this, and what is to be learned from it?
Right. I caused a real stink among the county schools back in, 2008. One of my kids was graduating. A graduation from high school ain't good enough now. They got to have graduations from 6th grade now. It's society's so crazy. But anyway, back to the point. They had this graduation for a public school at a church. The librarian gave the invocation. He closed out the invocation with Jesus Christ was our Lord and risen Savior. That was the statement he wanted to make at the end of his invocation. They had the Christian flag on there. I mean, they couldn't have been more over the top about it. And then look stunned when somebody like me started raising Cain the very next day, saying, what's next? Are you going to let the Scientologists host it next year and hand out e-meters? Is Benny Hinn and the faith healers are they going to do it 2 years from now? What's the county residents going to say when the Muslims want to host that graduation 3 years from now? You see, whatever's good for the goose is supposed to be good for the gander, and they don't realize when they're stepping into something. And I think these crosswalks and all these fag holidays and all these, all this wanting to be celebrating, wanting to be glorified. Just like I told you, Nixon was right. You acknowledge them. You say they exist, but you don't glorify them. You don't celebrate them. Come on, tell me what your feelings on that, Luke.
Well, I have a heterosexual hero system, so homosexual sex is in contradiction to my hero system, and so it makes me uncomfortable. If it's not shoved, down my throat, then it's not a big deal. But when I'm watching TV and there are all these ads for those, various, AIDS prep medications so that people can have anonymous sex with strangers and minimize their chances of getting AIDS, I find it obnoxious. I don't want ads glorifying a promiscuous sex with strangers life. I knew the names of all the women that I had sex with. So I'm not just a total horn dog. But what I'm concerned about is that you seem to have some skepticism that Benny Hinn cured people from cancer and AIDS.
You didn't think I knew about Benny Hinn, did you?
I'm concerned that you don't believe in his good works, bro.
Oh, I think they say with God all things are possible.
Exactly.
So I know Benny Hinn. Man, I hate those charlatans. I guess hatred is a word we use, but I hate those people. But on the other hand, there's like 1% of me that says that motherfucker is giving those people hope. He is giving hope to the hopeless, but I still would like to see him go in front of a firing squad. Does that make me bad?
Yes, you're a bad man, but I already knew that. Now, I think it's just more useful to look with acceptance at the world and to ask, what is the service that this man is providing? And so for most people who follow Benny Hinn, he is providing comfort in a painful world. And I think most people who follow him are receiving a benefit. Now, for some people, it becomes dysfunctional. But from a secular perspective, the primary purpose of religion is comfort. And so even those who have a much more respectable religion, from a completely secular perspective, what that religion is primarily giving is comfort.
Yeah, I think that's one reason I feel sorry for Christians, is because they are programmed to give at the end of the sermon, give at the end of the show, give at the end of the faith healing, give at the end. They're sort of programmed for that, and they kind of see the best in people. It's one thing that makes Tennessee a great place, but it also, God, it makes them fall for anything. They fall for anything. Before I get off of here, have you ever actually seen, I know you've seen, who's the comedian died in a car wreck?
Sam Kinison.
Sam Kinison. I know you've seen him.
Love Sam Kinison.
Where he's doing his comedy act and does some preaching inflection. But have you ever actually seen a Sam Kinison sermon? They're actually on the internet where he's actually talking about the Lord and being for real about it, as we would say in the Black community. They're on there. And another one is, there's another similar thing that you can see on the interwebs about Theo Von, where you can see he was a damn hustler for Christ long before he was a comic. Have you seen any of that on Theo Von as well?
I haven't seen that, but I've heard something better. I've heard Greg Johnson preach Christianity in a church.
I don't know Greg Johnson. Who is he?
Oh, you shouldn't know about that man. Bad man. Forget I said anything.
Okay. I'll delete that. I'll pretend I never heard about it.
Thank you.
But all right, I guess I've got more, I don't know, more notes.
Let me ask you a question. Where do you turn to for comfort?
When what?
Where do you turn to for comfort? Where do you turn? What do you want for comfort? What gives you comfort?
I don't know. I guess I just have to turn to myself.
No, you turn to marijuana.
Oh, that kind of comfort. I can, maybe some kind of relief. If you're talking where can I get relief when the world's just getting to me or whatever? Do
you have a favorite prostitute?
No.
So for you, they're just disposable.
Right. Pretty much. I don't know. I felt like I was with someone for so long, 14, 15 years, that then after the fact, I felt like I kind of reverted back to being a caveman, and it's very rare that I feel the urge to want that life of domesticity again. I feel like I've reverted back too much of my caveman ways, or women would probably call me a dinosaur, not a caveman. They'd probably say he's a dinosaur.
I love your new mic, by the way. It just sounds excellent. Question: did you and your father ever share the same prostitute?
No, we didn't. But
would you let him go first, though, out of respect for his age? If you did,
I guess I probably would. I guess if he could still function, I probably would. And maybe he can. Maybe he could surprise me. But before I get off on here, I will tell you that about a weird situation that happened one time. I had a roommate in the Marines, and I think his name was like McNair or McNew or whatever. That was his name.
Steve.
But anyway,
yeah, Steve McNair.
I don't know, but anyway, he looked. People would say, if you've ever heard this, where people say somebody looks exactly like you, but you can't see it. And this was the case with me and this guy. I couldn't see that we looked alike, but people were like, "It's hard to believe that you're roommates here in the Marines because you look so much alike." Well, I didn't really see the resemblance, or anyway. So anyway, fast forward, I don't know, maybe he had been my roommate for like a month or two, and I'm out at the club, and this woman starts hitting on me, but she's like, she knows me, and she's like putting her hand down my pants and all this kind of stuff, and acting like real overt about everything. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. But she's calling me by a different name. She's calling me by, strangely enough, my roommate's name. So I played along with this whole thing and ended up going the whole 9 yards with the gal. And then maybe a week later was having a laugh about it with my roommate. But this woman was married to the coach of the base softball team, and I was his third baseman. And so it got real weird because I was playing at a softball practice. We were practicing, and it was at the end of practice, I was getting ready to walk up to this, new girlfriend that I had and basically tell her, my name's not so-and-so, my name's actually Kip. You confused me with my roommate. And I was going to confess the whole thing to her. But to my chagrin, as the practice was over, the gunnery sergeant that was the coach of the whole team put his arm around her and gave her a big kiss. That was his wife. That was his wife. Me and my roommate had been using her as a dirty little sexual toy. Can you believe that, Luke Ford?
Was she mentally retarded?
I don't know. I guess she got bored during the daytime. She probably thought there's 12,000 Marines on this base. What are the odds that the people I'm screwing around with are connected to my husband? But by God, 2 of them were. We were both connected to her husband. He worked. He was a dirtier dog than me. I didn't know who the hell he was. I didn't know who her husband was. My roommate knew exactly who her husband was and screwed that gal anyway.
Wait. I need some advice. I'm thinking about marrying this woman, but she slept with about 6 guys I know in my Orthodox Jewish community, and so I've got some mixed feelings. Any advice?
I would say go ahead and lean into that one, because I ran across the same thing with the gal that I married. She, you ask women about their stats or whatever, how many been with?
Yeah.
She said 7. And I thought, that's higher than I wanted to hear. And I'm kind of like you. I'm thinking, if she's saying 7, God damn, the number's probably 3 times that. You know what I'm saying? It's what I'm thinking. But anyway, she said 7, and that's on the whole planet Earth, mind you. But somehow in the first month of going out with her, I had met 4 of those 7. What do you want to bet that number was north of 7, Luke Ford?
I would bet that it was north of 7. What if she'd only been with 2, but she was with both of them at the same time?
I don't know, because I think that might have happened. I don't know. I mean, she had to work the numbers to get to 4 of my friends. Think about it. Think about how unsociable I am, Luke. I ain't got but so many fucking friends. She got to 4 of them. She's good. She's efficient. But that tells me even more confidently that number 7 was bullshit. So does that answer your question from earlier?
Yeah, I got an additional question now.
Okay.
Do you think people first select their sexual strategy, either promiscuity or building a family, and then choose religion or no religion based on that? Or do you think people first choose religion or no religion and then select their sexual strategy?
Different folks for different strokes, different folks. Some guys can't get laid from going out to the club, so they have to go to the Sunday school or whatever. You get what I'm saying? That's their club. That's the only hope they got. Ain't no woman coming up to the job site with their foreman and coming looking for a boyfriend. Most of those kind of guys aren't working in an office environment where they're gonna sneak up onto a coworker or whatever. So I don't know. Does that answer that?
Thank you, Kip. That was insightful.
See you, bro.
See you, bro. Okay, blessings. Okay, saying 40, take a break, play some more Commentary Magazine. I want to hear what John Podhoretz has to say. Your wish is my command.
Adam Schiff, then Senate candidate in California, came out and said that Hur was lying to help Trump because he had worked in Republican administrations. Joe and Mika went to see Biden and said it's amazing. It's like having a conversation with Albert Einstein. People were lying through their teeth. That moment of the Hur report could have been the moment at which Democrats could have won the 2024 election.
Well, remember what also happened?
Saying
Biden came out, remember?
Oh, and
Biden came out and showed that Hur was absolutely correct.
That's right, because he confused
Mexico and Egypt.
Yes. But point is here that how many times are we Lucy in the football here?
Right.
His condition has been front of mind for people who are paying attention. Do I think that Kamala Harris should ever be president of the United States, all things being equal? No, don't like her. I don't like her policies. I think she's a third-rate intelligence and has a fourth-rate temperament, and I do not want her to be president. However, under our Constitution, when the president of the United States is infirm, and a process was put in place by a constitutional amendment in 1967 to deal with the problem of an infirm president. She is our vice president. She is the person who should have taken over the management of the government of this country in the wake of an obvious circumstance. And why did they keep the cabinet from Biden? Now let's talk tachlis, as we say.
It was her job to start the process, though.
It was not necessarily her job. Under the terms of the 25th Amendment, the cabinet, a majority of the cabinet, can vote to write a letter to the Speaker of the House and
she has to convene that meeting, right? Isn't it the vice president?
I don't have it right in front of me. The point is that they kept the cabinet away from Biden so that the cabinet would not get together at Cafe Milano in the back room and say, holy shit, he can't be president anymore. There's a war going on in Ukraine. Inflation is at 9%. And he is like looking up at the ceiling, and Jill is holding his hand, and we can't talk to him.
Here's the thing.
They deliberately kept him from the body of people who are the ones who could invoke the 25th Amendment against him.
She does need to be involved. I'm looking at the text of the 25th Amendment.
Yes.
It's the vice president and the majority.
Well, if the cabinet went to her and said, Ms. Vice President, you are aware that we have to invoke the 25th Amendment.
She would say, I need some time to think about it, and no one would hear from her for weeks.
Yeah. Okay.
And then finally she'd come out and say, okay, I'm ready to be president now.
Okay. I don't think we've gotten to the heart of the real problem.
So I thought Schindler's List was a powerful and inspiring movie, but it contains nudity. And so for some people, this would be absolute poison for your soul to watch. And then for other people, I don't think it would hurt them. And there is a movie that's much more sexual than Schindler's List. It's called Anora. It's about a stripper, and she falls for the son of a Russian oligarch. And it's quite raunchy, great deal of nudity and implied sex scenes, and it turns profound. So if watching nudity or a sex scene is bad for you, don't watch this movie. If it is not poison for your soul, then I thought it was a pretty good movie. I did not experience this movie as sending me down a bad trajectory in life, though everyone's experience of this sort of thing will be different.
Problem with this yet, which is while White House aides are sort of praising themselves for this, quote, system where, the emergency generator kicks in the executive branch. It didn't work. In terms of policy went south. Bad things happened. Seth touched on a bunch of this yesterday in terms of foreign policy in a post up at Commentary. For example, the Afghanistan withdrawal. Biden was out there saying things about the, at the time, standing Afghanistan government that was wrong, too hopeful, and proved disastrous. And when people tried to get a hold of him to say, whoa, you're way out ahead of your skis, this is a bad situation, what's going on? They got calls from Tony Blinken yelling at him. And the Afghanistan withdrawal was a disaster. This didn't work. It worked to the extent that they snowed people who wanted to be snowed in the media already sufficiently. Yeah, that worked. But they didn't run the country competently without a president.
Okay, so there's two things here, which is I think that the policy went south, and the policy would have gone south, that in that sense, the fish rots from the head. They were representing who Biden was in broad brush. All the policy blame for the failures of the Biden administration do in the end land on Biden's head, even if he didn't.
Right, here is Charlie Munger, who was vice chair of Berkshire Hathaway, conglomerate controlled by Warren Buffett. Charlie Munger died in 2023. Here are 42 seconds of a conversation between them.
The toxic people who are trying to fool you or lie to you, who aren't reliable in meeting their commitments, The great lesson of life is get them the hell out of your life.
Yeah.
And do it fast. Do it fast.
So, what's the shorthand? What the hell is he talking about? There's so many conversational points about toxic people. It's a term that is often abused, but here's the essence of the usefulness of this topic. Generally speaking, good people make you feel good. Bad people make you feel bad. People who make you feel bad, you usually want to keep them out of your life.
And I would.
Now, on the other hand, I've had employers who never praised me, only criticized me, but they were great. I revered them. They were so smart, so accomplished. I found their criticism so useful that their criticism may have made me feel bad in the moment, but overall, it was a great experience working for them. Other people are very glib with praise, but they were bad for me. So use wisdom.
Would add, Charlie would totally agree with me. Do it tactfully if possible, too. But do get them out of your life.
Yes. Yeah, I don't mind a little tact. Or even a little financial cost. But the question is getting them the hell out of the life. The toxic people.
Yeah, it's a good idea to do things with tact. And it's rarely a good idea to just completely cut people out of your life. But you can dial people up and down in your life. You can reduce the number of times that you see people. You can reduce the number of times that you talk to people. You can reduce the number of times that you text or chat online with people. You can reduce the intensity with which you engage people. You can reduce the intimacy, right? You can switch from talking in person to just texting. You can switch the intensity of the interactions. You can dial that way down. Usually, you're better off gray rocking people than just completely cutting them out of your life. So gray rocking means that you don't give them anything that they can then use you to hurt you. So usually you shouldn't tell your coworkers or people in your church or synagogue anything about you that you would not want to hear them gossip about. If you overshare, as I have frequently done, that's coming from neediness. Because I did not have sufficient connection and friends, depth and breadth of friendships in my life, I would overshare way too quickly with people I didn't know very well because I was emotionally needy. And it doesn't really matter trying to navigate your strategies with being overly needy. Your over neediness is going to come out in all sorts of embarrassing and self-destructive ways. You have to address that so that you're able to learn to give yourself the care and attention and praise that you want from other people, which means you have to be able to live a life from the time you get up in the morning till the time you go to bed at night that you can be proud of. So when you live a life where you're proud of your actions throughout the day, where you're proud of the overall trend in your life, when you're proud of the decisions that you make, the way you speak, the way you act, then you will feel better about yourself. You will develop a good reputation with yourself, and then you'll be much less needy. But I have, for much of my life, had a poor reputation with myself, and so I try to fill up the emptiness inside with overly fast connection with other people. I would be way too vulnerable with people I didn't know very well, and I would be overly needy. That doesn't work well. And just cutting people out of your life, people will usually take exception. But you can reduce the amount of time you spend with them. You can reduce the times that you see them. You can change from seeing people in person to you only see them as parts of group discussions, which will usually be less intense and less personal. You can reduce the duration, the intensity, the number of times, right? So turn people up and down in your life depending on whether or not they're good for you.
Didn't know what was going on. They know him, the aides who were dealing with him and Jill and all that, have known him for 30 years. They know what he likes. They know what he thinks. And they were probably, to some extent, fulfilling what they understood to be the policy as he would have wanted it.
But that's not a normal process, though. Because normally there are fights within an administration over things like this, and those can affect the outcome of the decisions. You don't automatically...
Okay, there can be fights.
And they very specifically were withholding information.
Right, okay. But that's my point, which is they were withholding information from him with the understanding, that is, Tony Blinken's been an aide of his for years. He's been married to Jill for years. He's got this team of people, including his family, around him for years, and they're like, we've always been his brain. We've always been his brain. So we're his brain now. What difference does it possibly make? And the American people, to their credit, in some sense, were able to make this judgment based on the fact that the administration was lousy. It was lousy at what it did. It is that we don't know what bullets we dodged or didn't dodge.
So there is an X premium pricing adjustment now. I think it's just going to be $84 a year. I think it was something like $120 I paid. But if you think that X has changed for the best under Elon Musk, and you like the direction of X, you like the direction of Elon Musk's involvement in American politics and European politics, then it would make sense that you'd get a premium subscription to X so that you can support his good work.
Let's put it that way. Things happen that we don't know about, that he was not consulted on. And we don't know what the ultimate consequences were. Was there a point in the 2 weeks before Putin invaded Ukraine that something or other might have happened that a more crisis managerial president on top and on the ball could have done to talk Putin out of it? It's stuff like that we don't.
Or how about this? When Volodymyr Zelensky.
So I pay for YouTube Premium. I think it costs about $130 a year, and I get to skip all the ads. And so for me, it's a good investment.
He comes here and says, we need weapons, we need this, we need that, and we could turn.
And I pay for $3 a month for ad-free Amazon Prime programs.
The tide we can win. Are the people around Biden saying he could be right, but this is the kind of undertaking that this president cannot deal with right now? We have to insulate him from taking on Russia via Ukraine.
And the problem I have is that I'm concerned that we will never know what we don't know. And I mean, if you look at one of the other things that they did, and this wasn't really covered much in the Wall Street Journal story, if this is one of the greatest scandals in American presidential history, the cover-up of Joe Biden's condition. But remember, all along the way, they were cleaning up transcripts. They were putting pressure on archivists to alter things. We might not even ever get the full historical record, the full analysis, the full accountability that we should as Americans about what this administration did and how much they
And
were
the entire
operators.
time, they're telling America that there's a threat to democracy.
Yeah.
From the opposition.
And the entire time they're running him
the leader
for
of the opposition
re-election.
in jail.
They're running him for re-election.
Now let's talk about now. Let's
4 more years of that. They're hiding him from people. Nobody sees him alive, and they're running him for re-election.
All right, so this is the most prominent journalist apology for his Joe Biden coverage. It comes from Chris Cillizza, veteran Washington Post politics reporter, CNN reporter, who's now gone out on his own on YouTube and Substack.
As a reporter, I have a confession to make. I should have pushed harder earlier for more information about Joe Biden's mental and physical well-being and any signs of decline. So let me explain. Joe Biden was president from 2020 to 2024. I worked at CNN through 2022. During that time, the early part when I was at CNN, 2020 to 2022, Republicans would regularly ping me and say, why don't you ask more questions of Joe Biden and how he's doing? He's 76, 77, 78-year-old man. And I would sort of brush them off because what I would say is, well, there's no obvious evidence that he's declining. Yeah, he moves a little slower, he talks a little slower, but there's no evidence that he's declining. And the White House and the people around Joe Biden were absolutely adamant that suggesting anything, asking the question about whether he was in some physical, mental, or both decline was offensive. How could you? It's age shaming. And I think that impacted me at some level because while I did ask the question from time to time of, not directly the White House, but aides and people around in that orbit, I didn't really push on it, if I'm being honest. Now, once I left CNN and once it became a little bit more clear to me about Biden's age, I think I did write pretty regularly and talk pretty regularly about how I wasn't sure that this guy was up to it. And then obviously after the June 27th debate, everybody, including me, was writing and talking about it. The reason that I bring this up is in the last 48 hours, there have been two stories, one by the New York Times and one by the Wall Street Journal, that document the decline of Joe Biden and how we probably should have known then and reported then what we know now. So let me just read a little bit of the Wall Street Journal piece, which is based off of 50, that's me drawing it for some unknown reason, 50 interviews with people in and around Biden. I'm just going to read a bit. To adapt the White House around the needs of a diminished leader, they told visitors to keep meetings focused. Interactions with senior Democratic lawmakers and some cabinet members, including powerful secretaries such as Defense's Lloyd Austin and Treasury's Janet Yellen, were infrequent or grew less frequent. Some legislative leaders had a hard time getting the president's ear at key moments, including ahead of the U.S.'s disastrous pullout from Afghanistan. Senior advisors were often put into roles that some administration officials and lawmakers thought Biden should occupy, with people such as National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, Senior Counselor Steve Ricchetti, and National Economic...
So I want to apologize for the lack of accuracy in my headline. So my headline is Journos apologize for lack of coverage of Joe Biden's obvious senility, but I'm only aware of one. So are there more who are doing this sort of apology?
Council had Lael Brainerd and her predecessor frequently in the position of being go-betweens for the president. Press aides who compiled packages of news clips for Biden were told by senior staff to exclude negative stories about the president. The president wasn't talking to his own pollsters, as surveys showed him trailing in the 2024 race. Sorry, I'm looking up the New York Times piece because I want to quote from the New York Times piece as well. That is pretty damning. Then there's this, the headline, New York Times, this is earlier this week, a weary Biden heads for the exits. This is the twilight of Mr. Biden's presidency, the final days of the final chapter of an epic half-century political journey that has more than its share of twists and turns. Time is catching up with Mr. Biden. He looks a little older and a little slower with each passing day. Aides say he remains plenty sharp in the Situation Room, calling world leaders to broker a ceasefire in Lebanon or a deal with the chaos of Syria's rebellion. But it is hard to imagine that he seriously thought he could do the world's most stressful job for another 4 years. Okay, I know that's a lot of text that I read, but that's what's got me thinking about the fact that I probably should have pushed harder on the Biden age stuff. Because in retrospect, it's clear that the people close to him knew that at best he had some good days and some bad days. June 27th, the debate clearly was a bad day. But if the bad day was that bad as he performed on that debate stage, the fact that he had been president without a whole lot of questions being asked about his physical and mental decline, and I'll add the fact that he continued to be president from June 27th until January 20th, 2025, I think is a little bit concerning and begs the question of, like, when did people near him know? What did they know? And why did they not share? I get protecting Biden's privacy, but he's the president of the United States, right? Like, this isn't just your grandpa who you want to, like, take the keys from, but you're not to his car, but you're not totally sure how to approach it. This is the sitting president of the United States who will continue to be after June 27th, was the president for another 6 months. And we don't know how far back signs of this physical and mental decline went. And again, I don't put it just on myself or just on journalists, because I know journalists did ask, and I can tell you, I mean, I know from my experience, there was a shame factor that went into that. People around Biden worked to make you feel bad when you asked whether he was up to the job of being president, running for president again, and serving as president for another 4 years. How could you? and they did a very good job, at least until they couldn't hide it anymore, of hiding it, of making it so that it was very hard to know. Yes, but he didn't do a lot of press conferences. Yes, he didn't do a lot of media interviews. But, when he did things, the thing I always remember is he gave the State of the Union speech earlier this year, and he was fine. There were no obvious signs of decline. I mean, yes, he looked like an 80-year-old guy, but I wasn't like, this man cannot under no circumstances be president. So they did a good job of hiding it for a long time. But journalists, and I put myself here, you've got to, we should have been pushier. I don't want to speak for everyone. I should have not let the shame campaign to make you feel bad for asking the question get to me. Because it's now clear from both the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times piece that there was real deterioration even before, and by the way, all the reporting that we've seen since the June 27th debate, it's not just these two stories, that there was real and significant decline in Joe Biden, and that it was being managed by the people around him. They were insulating him. They were keeping sort of the political world out and keeping him sort of bunkered in. And that should have been something we knew more about. Now, you can argue, well, what does it matter? Biden eventually got out of the race, and it's not like he's sure, but he's been the president for the last 4 years. So it's critically important. And we've learned, by the way, questions about presidential health, mental and physical health, whether it's Ronald Reagan or Kennedy or FDR. We've seen a lot of it. Trump, we've seen a lot of this where there is a lack of transparency. So we need to learn our lesson, I think. Donald Trump's going to come into office in his late 70s. We know very little about his medical history. I think we as journalists need to keep asking questions. Have you seen any signs of his mental or physical decline? Now, his aides may just say, no, he's great, 100%. But keep digging. If there are those signs, there will be the people who are worried about it. And we should have gotten to those people with Biden more and more frequently to accurately represent.
So I think this apology is better than not doing an apology, but I think it's incredibly shallow. The profound and obvious nature of Joe Biden's cognitive decline from 2017 onward just makes this seem like a boring minor league matter. It was a matter of national importance, and it would only happen with the news media currently protecting someone on the left. They would never be this protective of a Republican president. So what would a real apology be made out of? So I'm thinking of a gymnast in my high school who I developed fond feelings for. I rode the bus with her every morning. She was 2 grades below me, so I was a senior when she was a sophomore. And one evening on the way back from the gymnastics championship, I instigated a fracas on the bus where we all started tickling each other because I wanted to get my hands on her, but I didn't know how to do it appropriately. So I just started tickling her, and then everybody started tickling everybody else. And I thought I'd pulled this off in a very sophisticated way, but I completely changed her view of me. So she was positively disposed towards me prior to the tickling attack. And then afterwards, she was not so positively disposed. And when I asked her to write in my yearbook, she called me the rapist. And she went to the senior prom with an acquaintance of mine, and I was jealous, and I was loathing myself for getting on her bad side through my bad behavior. And so I spread rumors that she'd had massive sex with this guy after the senior prom, and it wasn't true, and it was reprehensible. And so when I came down with chronic fatigue syndrome and was feeling very introspective about 5 years later, I reached out to her and found out she was teaching English in Japan. So I sent her a radio cassette tape, in part because I wanted to display for her my new voice. I'd learned these voice exercises gave me a very deep, resonant voice. She said, "Wow, I barely recognize you, and I apologize for my bad behavior." And she says, "Look, you weren't any worse than a lot of other guys." So I think she effectively forgave me, and that was it. And even though I went into a little bit of detail, a little bit of depth, that was still a very shallow apology. And I like the 12-step model, in particular, the 4-step model for coming to terms with the damage that you've done to other people. So let's just say I felt a resentment towards this girl. So why do I resent her? Because she's not my girlfriend. What part of me does this affect? It affects my self-esteem, my romantic sexual self, and my social relations. What role did I play in minimizing the chances that this woman could become my girlfriend? I gratuitously and against her wishes started tickling her, which some people really, really hate. So I invaded her boundaries, and then I spread a lie about her because I felt so insecure. And then what would I do differently going forward? I would abstain from tickling people who didn't want to be tickled, and I would abstain from telling lies about people. So how would we go deeper when I do? You work these columns in a horizontal fashion, but you get clarity in a horizontal fashion when you read down. So I tend to hate people who provoke in me a lowered self-esteem and lowered social status. Those are the two common denominators. So when I feel worse about myself after interacting with someone, and when I feel that my social standing has been reduced, I am then highly prone to resenting that person and then carrying that resentment around with me. And when you carry resentment around with you, you lack clarity and you tend to behave worse. So that would be a deeper way for someone to notice what's going on and to make amends. So let's take Chris Cillizza here. What is his where does he have a resentment? He resents being mocked for not covering Joe Biden's obvious senility. So what does that do to him? It lowers his self-esteem, and it lowers his professional standing, and it probably lowers his income. So what mistake did he make? He essentially gave Joe Biden a free pass. He explains because the Biden White House shamed him. But the deeper issue here is he didn't want to get out of step with his fellow journalists, right? The group that he most wants to fit in with, the group where he most wants high standing, the group that he most wants respect and praise from is his own profession. He would have gotten out of step with his own profession, and he would have experienced social ostracism if he had investigated more deeply Joe Biden's obvious senility. Like, he was willing to effectively, by largely omission, cooperate in a cover-up of Joe Biden's obvious senility. And so the insight that he might have gained from a more thorough examination of what was going on here is how vulnerable he is to wanting the respect of his peers and how painful ostracism from his peers would be. And so he refuses to say things that would cost him the esteem of his peers. And so that's where he gets out of touch with reality.
Yeah, right. And I just, to underscore what Abe is saying, it takes a president. And I immediately think back of the Yom Kippur War, where it took Nixon, who even though he was facing Watergate, even though he was definitely confronting the demons inside him, it took Nixon to get on the phone and say, everything flies now. Right. And you need a president to do that. If you're just relying on the aides, even Kissinger was not enough. And Kissinger weirdly was like fighting with Schlesinger over what to do. You need the president to say, no, this all has to happen now.
Nixon is a very good example, counterexample here of when you don't need to invoke the 25th Amendment and your aides are working in concert with you, even though we're talking about Nixon at low ebb. The Nixon story is that Nixon would get drunk in the Oval Office and would bring in Ehrlichman and Haldeman, and he would say things like, let's, or G. Gordon Liddy has a great idea. We can blow up the Brookings Institution, or do something about all those Jews in the Ivy League, and they're terrible. And Haldeman and Ehrlichman knew that what he was doing was blowing off steam. They knew him. They knew Nixon to be a sophisticated, complex person who did not want these things done, and that he was calling them in so he could vent, and that they would not, like G. Gordon Liddy would have had he been them, like go out with a notebook and then say, the president says we should blow up the Brookings Institution. So somebody plant a bomb.
So John Podhoretz is incredibly energetic, entertaining, compelling social media character. Because in part he is so volatile, and he gives free rein to many obnoxious, nasty, uncalled for, hyperbolic remarks about people. And I don't like that side of him, but I have to admit that by giving a lot of vent to this really nasty and unappealing side of himself, it also frees him up to be such a compelling social media personality.
In front of the Brookings Institution. That's how a system dealing with the unbelievable pressures of a presidency, particularly one that is in decline, might or might not have to work. This is a different story because, as Seth says, they were running. Why were they running him for re-election? He had a perfect through line.
And Bob Oettberger, the voice of common sense, the voice of the people, the voice of the best of us. All of us have a little Bob Oettberger inside. But do we listen to the Bob Oettberger, or do we listen to the Nick Fuentes and Richard Spencer side of ourselves? Right? It's time that we listen to our better angels as embodied by such an upstanding citizen of the West, Bob Oettberger. He says the Democrats and the media throwing Joe Biden under the bus does several things. They get back some credibility, and then they may freely attack Donald Trump for his age. Well said, Bob Oettberger. The man embodies the better angels of our nature.
For his presidency, I'm a bridge to the future. I'm going to run one term. I'm here to normalize. I'm here to get rid of Trump, put America back on track, and pass the torch to a new generation. He does that. He's Cincinnatus. He puts down his plow. Power is not what's important to him. The country is what's important to him. The narrative that you could see developed historically about Biden is so attractive and so impressive that you then ask yourself, okay, so why did he want?
So everyone who does what I do with live streaming on Hot Button Topics and what John Podhoretz does is largely doing it for a feeling of self-importance. You know, you might be seeing a person of quality when you notice that they are willing to give up certain things because they've got a higher value at times than their own ego and feeding their own sense of self-importance. So if someone claims to be religious, what do they give up in the name of their religion? What are they abstaining from that they are dying to do in service of their religion? If you can't obviously see things that they're giving up in service of their religion is shallow and is just a pose. If people optimize, say, for truth or for a pro-social message at the cost of an audience, at the cost of income, at the cost of notoriety and fame, then that's another indication that you're dealing with someone who, at least at times, has something higher that they aspire to than simply feeding their own ego. If you don't notice people obviously making sacrifices, obviously abstaining from feeding their own sense of importance and ego, then you're dealing with someone probably lacking in good quality. Do you like the song Ordinary World by Duran Duran? I love this song. It just means so much to me. It just kind of embodies how I've gone through life. that various times in my life I've been adopted by this friend or that family, and the ache and loneliness and pain inside seems to be ameliorated. Came in from a rainy Thursday on the avenue, thought I heard you talking softly. I turned on the lights, the TV, and the radio. Still, I can't escape the ghost of you. Have you had people enter your life who made you feel whole? Right, I guess it's called borrowed functioning, but it feels so delicious. Right, when I get around certain people, my histrionic desires to act out for attention's sake become calmed. What has happened to it all? Crazy, some say. Where is the life that I recognize? Gone away. But I won't cry for yesterday. There's an ordinary world somehow I have to find, and as I try to make my way to the ordinary world, I will learn to survive. Passion or coincidence once prompted you to say, pride will tear us apart. Wasn't that what Reagan said? We can accomplish a lot of good if we don't fight over who gets credit for it. Well, now pride's gone out the window, crossed the rooftops, run away, left me in the vacuum of my heart. My God, I love the music of love addiction. And have you seen that new HBO documentary on yacht rock? So yacht rock is about men being emotionally vulnerable and raw. Yacht rock is not my favorite kind of music, right? Air Supply is not yacht rock, but it's still, I appreciate the emotional vulnerability of the men who write and sing yacht rock. And I was just about to say something that would forever change your life, and now it's gone. I don't know what's happened. It's like my thoughts gone out the window, it's crossed the rooftops, it's run away, it's left me in the vacuum of my heart.
Want to stay president. Let's assume that he thought he had to because Kamala couldn't possibly win, and guess what? She didn't. Maybe that's one thing. But the other is he didn't make that decision. They made that decision because they wanted to stay in power, because Blinken wanted to be Secretary of State and Sullivan wanted to be National Security Advisor and Jill Biden.
So there are many movies that I enjoy watching for a second and third and fourth time, but I can only think of one movie that I enjoy more each time I watch it. Now, I usually go about 8-10 years or so between viewings, but Chariots of Fire is the only movie that I enjoy more frequently I watch it, even though it's probably 10 years between viewings. So I love Cinema Paradiso, and I love finally getting the director's cut version. Came out 20 years ago, but it does not, no subsequent viewing of that movie has had the shattering effect the first viewing did. When I watched that film for the first time, and I was just ripped open inside, because it's about a boy who leaves his hometown and becomes great in the world. And that's kind of always the narrative that I've had about myself, that I would leave my insular Seventh-day Adventist world and achieve greatness in the bigger world, but that it would come at an enormous price. So that's kind of a narrative I've had in my brain. So I resonate to Cinema Paradiso, came out about 1988. But then as the credits were rolling, the first time I watched that movie, there is an image of the love interest 20 years on. So when the protagonist returns to his hometown for the funeral for his beloved mentor and projector, right? There's a momentary flash of an image of the love interest and what she'd looked like at this time. And apparently Miramax insisted that the Italian director just hack his movie down, and so essentially reduce it from something like 3 hours to 2 hours. And so his whole reunion with his love interest from 25 years previous, when he was a nobody in an insular town, that just gets completely cut from the final version that was put in the theaters circa 1988. And all that remained of it was like one flickering image in the credits of what that woman would have looked like in middle age. And it just like, just ripped me open inside. My God, did that land. And I love getting to see the final director's cut where you get to see them reunite after 25 years. But subsequent viewings of Cinema Paradiso don't have nearly the impact of the first viewing. A Perfect World by Kevin Costner. He accidentally kidnaps a Jehovah's Witness kid and helps him become exposed to a bigger world outside. That movie just ripped me up the first time because I grew up pretty sheltered Seventh-day Adventist kid, so that resonated with me. But it wasn't nearly as intense as the first time I saw it. What about A Man for All Seasons? Shook me up. I think I've only seen that movie twice. So I think I saw it for the first time around age 8, 9, or 10. And it kind of became a narrative for my life that I saw myself like the protagonist in A Man for All Seasons, that I was someone who would stand for integrity and truth, though the heavens fall, even though it cost me my life and status. It helped to implant a martyr narrative in my soul. Legends of the Fall, cried all the way through the last half of that movie the second time I saw it. Never had that same emotional reaction to it on a subsequent viewing. Big Fish ripped me open, but I was on a date with probably the most beautiful woman who I dated for a year. And it was like 7:15, and she wanted the restaurant to box up her dessert that she wasn't eating, and I wanted to get to the 7:30 showing of the movie, so I kind of got her out of the restaurant before they could box up her dessert. And she was a blogger, and I'd become attracted to her through her sassy writing. But when I started having sex with her, started doing intimate things with her, I started emotionally feeling very intimate towards her, and then her blogging started hurting me. And it hurt me that my friends often thought she wasn't very smart. And so I stopped reading her blog. And so she felt assured that I wouldn't read her blog. And so for some reason, so we went out to dinner, and then I rushed her out to see the movie Big Fish. And it was the first time we'd gone to a movie where she did not respond to my physical overtures. It was the first time we'd gone out in 11 months where we didn't spend the night and have sex afterward. So that probably limited the emotional impact, while the emotional impact of Legends of the Fall was amplified because I was dating a woman who wouldn't have sex with me. And I'd gone out with her. This was like our third date. I mean, I'd even taken this Gentile woman to shul on Friday night. I mean, I'd done so much for her. One day we walked around UCLA, and she got all offended because I was getting changed, and I got changed in front of her, got naked in front of her. But anyway, she wouldn't do anything more than make out with me. And so that hurt my self-esteem. And so I was sitting with her during this movie and just cried and cried and cried. And probably a large part of the reason that I cried was she wouldn't have sex with me. I remember another woman that I knew in Jewish life, and she wouldn't have sex with me. And we were sitting at the sukkah table of this Orthodox rabbi, and I was writing her notes. But even though I wrote her these charming notes, she still wouldn't have sex with me. And then after we sat at this rabbi sukkah, I was sitting in the car with her, and I was just getting over a relationship with a woman who gave me like the greatest sex of my life. So I was feeling really vulnerable. And I just started crying because this new woman, she wouldn't have sex with me, even though this was like our second or third date. And then we got back together like 15 years later, and then I no longer wanted to have sex with her. So yeah, I probably cried and cried about Legends of the Fall because I was just feeling so raw and so emotionally vulnerable because she wouldn't have sex with me. So I might have experienced Big Fish, bigger emotional impact on a second or third viewing. I love that movie so much. I got a family member to watch it with me. It's about a successful young man who has a troubled relationship with his father. And over the course of this movie, he gets to see his father in more dimensions. just reminded me so much of my own troubled relationship with my father. Love Story, first time I saw it on TV, on our little black and white TV on like a Saturday night when everyone was gone from home, and I just cried and cried and cried because it would have been like junior or senior year in high school, and I felt unloved. Right? The closest I got to feel to genuine romantic love between much of 8th grade to 12th grade was listening to Air Supply songs. And just cried and cried and cried. And then I may have only watched Love Story a second time about 6-8 years ago. It didn't have nearly the impact it had on me the first time. So yeah, particularly in my more love-struck, love-sick, love-addicted stage of my life, I really enjoyed a good cry. I remember I had a setback a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, and I decided I'm just going to curl up in bed and have a good cry about it. And the tears my eyes are just starting to get wet. And then I decided, no, I'm not going to have a cry. I'm just going to go back to Australia for a couple of months. And so instead of having a good cry, I just decided to go back to Australia. So I can't remember the last time I sobbed. Might be 20 years. But my eyes will moisten at times. I think my eyes may have moistened during Donald Trump and Mike Pence's last rally in Michigan in the 2020 election when I feared that Trump was going to lose that election. I think my eyes moistened up when Mike Pence quoted scripture. Mike Pence just gave a lovely little speech in that final rally.
Biden wanted to sit at the Resolute desk signing documents. That is why the 25th Amendment exists, is to prevent Edith Wilson from becoming president of the United States. And the failure of that process, put into place so painstakingly and in complicated terms, is worrisome because we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what decisions were made that Biden was or was not involved with. And we don't know what options were brought to him that he couldn't decipher or make sense of. And that's why the idea isn't, well, maybe he can be president. It is, the presidency is a series of crises every single day across the United States and the planet. And if the president is not in a proper mental mind space to be president, somebody else has to become president because we don't know what's going to face him tomorrow. Do we know that the China balloon situation wasn't something that happened because nobody could wake him up? Do we know what the hell is going on with the drones? Do we have any trust that anything that we've been told about the drones over the last 3 weeks is true? No, because there's no check at the top. Ultimately, the presidency is a check on the executive branch itself, in that sense that, as Abe says, there are fights inside administrations over.
I think my favorite Air Supply song some days is Chances. It's not one of their big hits. There's a chance you will be there. So growing up on Seventh-day Adventist colleges, there would often be Seventh-day Adventist social events for youth, and I would so often long for the object of my affection to be there. There's a chance you will be there. I'd like to know the truth. I'll find it out somehow. The chances aren't too strong. So I was afraid that I'd be outcompeted for her love, say, by college guys who had cars and took her to rock music concerts, and I'd get so insecure that I'd just cut off all interactions with the first girl that I loved. And she wouldn't have sex with me. A chance you will be there. I mean, I couldn't even go beyond kissing. Please be there alone. Don't be there with some college guy who takes you to a Journey concert. Help me speak of love. Chances aren't enough. One's too good to miss. Chances aren't too strong. A chance is all there is. There's a chance that you will be there, wondering what to do, how to play my role. I'll leave it up to you. So my first love, summer of 1982, we both loved Barry Manilow. But I didn't know how to kiss at that point. I got educated the night of Penn State's stirring national championship victory over Herschel Walker and the Georgia Bulldogs, and I was. This was January 1, approximately 1983. So I was a junior. She was a freshman, and we were up in this loft at a youth party, and she taught me how to kiss. She was an amazing kisser. Like, she taught me about gliding our lips and nibbling, and then the graceful use of the tongue. She educated me, and so with that confidence that I then took away from that, the next summer I went back to Pacific Union College, and I was walking with this girl who I loved. I was able to cross a stream with her and then take her waist in my hands and lean over and kiss her properly. And the first time we finished French kissing, she said, we could have been doing this last summer, but I wasn't skilled. I didn't know how to do it. I also read a book on how to be a confident kisser. I think I borrowed that book from my best friend's sister, who was like 2 or 3 years younger than us. And then we'd make out, but then she wouldn't let me go any further. And so then I cut her off and didn't talk to her after that. There's a chance you will be there wondering what to do, how to play my role. I'll leave it up to you. If I disguise my smile, it gives too much away. What if we can't speak? What then shall I say? Don't you be too long. Something has gone wrong. The chances are all gone. So this is the single greatest thing that has ever happened to me in my life. It's early in 6th grade at Pacific Union College Elementary School. And the most beautiful girl in the class, a tall brunette who had put on strawberry-flavored lip smacker on her lips, and she had long black hair. And she dropped a note on my desk saying, will you go with me? Like, the greatest thing that's ever happened to me in my whole life. I was just overcome by emotion. And I was offered what I've always wanted most, at least from like 4th grade on. And I didn't know how to handle it, and I didn't know who I could talk to about it. And so I responded by shaming her and teasing her and mocking her. And then a few months later, when I changed my mind and asked her, will you go with me? She wrote back, no way, get stuff, get lost. But that moment that this beautiful girl in my class, Cindy, dropped a note on my desk asking, will you go with me? Like that a beautiful girl would ask me to be her boyfriend. Right? That was the greatest moment of my whole life. Everything else has been downhill from there. So that would have been probably early October 1977.
Policy that the president is the final arbiter of. That was the Reagan.
He's the one elected person in the executive. In that circle of people making these decisions, he's the only one that's been elected.
Right, but Nixon's the one who had to say, let everything fly. In the Reagan administration, there would be fights over budget versus tax cuts, or this policy versus that policy, and they would roil and bubble, and then...
So if I'd said yes, right, I'd probably still be a Seventh-day Adventist to this day. Right, my life would have gone on a totally different trajectory.